No. All right. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee's budget hearing. Today we have 6 agencies before us. We'll begin with the Office of the Attorney General. We'll start with our DLS analysts, followed by the agency representative. In this case, it's the Attorney General Anthony G. Brown, and we will start with our analyst, Mr. Scott Benson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Scott Benson, and I will be presenting the operating analysis for the Office of the Attorney General. OAG acts as legal counsel to the state and represents the interests of the state in civil litigation and criminal appeals. As you can see in the operating budget summary on page 1, the fiscal 2027 budget increases by $8.3 million, or 8.9%, to $101.6 million. Section 21 of the fiscal 2026 budget bill added $3.6 million in general funds to provide to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, or MLSC, and $200,000 for the Consumer Protection Division for a contract to provide additional resources to investigate and enforce laws regarding ticket scalping. OAG should comment on the planned timeline for when a contract will be procured and the funds will be expended. As you can see in Exhibit 1 on page 3, Legal Counsel and Advice is the largest program, comprising 40% or $40.7 million of OAG's fiscal 2027 allowance. In Exhibit 2 on page 4, 70% or $71.3 million of the fiscal 2027 allowance supports 408.45 regular positions. The second largest category is grants for MLSC, which consists of 19% or $19 million of the total allowance. As you can see in Exhibit 3 on page 5, the fiscal 2027 allowance increases by $8.3 million, with the largest change due to personnel-related expenses. Outside of personnel-related expenses, funding for contractual legal services increases by about $930,000 because of the $1.5 million increase in the mandated appropriation to support the Federal Accountability Unit, or FAU. As you can see in the personnel data on page 6, as of December 31st, 2025, OAG had 25.2 vacancies. The fiscal 2027 allowance includes 4 additional positions: a program manager for the People's Insurance Council, an assistant attorney general for the Consumer Protection Division, a paralegal for the Correctional Litigation Division, and an assistant attorney general for the Correctional Litigation Division. In Exhibit 4 on page 8, you can see that the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit completed 105 total investigations in fiscal 2025, while the number of new cases increased by 22 or 18.6% compared to fiscal 2024. In a report OAG submitted, the agency credited the decrease in activity due to a new intake process for referrals that has lowered total caseloads but increased efficiency. OAG should discuss current efforts and estimated resources needed to implement the recommendations made in the report to improve unit efficiency. You can see in Exhibit 5 on page 9, the total recoveries obtained by the unit decreased between fiscal 2024 and fiscal 2025 by $1.2 million to a total of $9.3 million. These recoveries were collected through 19 separate recovery actions, with a single case being responsible for $5.7 million of the fiscal 2025 total. Chapter 746 of 2021 established the Access to Counsel and Evictions Program, or the ACE program, along with the ACE Special Fund. This was to provide legal representation in cases of eviction for qualifying individuals. The ACE program and the ACE Special Fund are administered by MLSC. You can see in Exhibit 6 on page 11 that Anne Arundel, Baltimore, and Prince George's counties, as well as Baltimore City, accounted for 72% of the total number of cases served by ACE in fiscal 2025. Chapter 40 of 2022, as amended later by Chapter 641 of 2023, requires that $14 million be distributed annually from the Abandoned Property Fund to the ACE Special Fund, and that the governor include in the annual budget bill an appropriation of $14 million from the ACE Special Fund to MLSC. These requirements were set to expire after fiscal 2027. However, Chapter 457 of 2025 extends the annual distribution and mandated appropriation through fiscal 2028. As shown in Exhibit 7 on page 12, ACE cost total is $17.6 million in fiscal 2025, with legal services grants comprising 85% of total expenditures. MLSC has projected that the program will spend $23.7 million for fiscal 2026. However, the fiscal 2026 working appropriation only includes $16.5 million for the program. MLSC determines its projections by looking at areas for expansion or methods to further the program's outreach, which ultimately increases the program's demand. At the fiscal 2025 level of funding, which was $17.6 million, the program was able to serve 12,778 cases, even with $1.1 million supporting efforts to increase outreach. As the program receives $16.5 million in the fiscal 2025 allowance, similar levels of service in fiscal 2025 should be provided in fiscal 2027. Chapter 26 of 2017, or the Maryland Defense Act, authorizes OAG to defend any civil or criminal suit or action based on the federal government's action that threaten the public's interest and the welfare of the state's residents. This act also established a mandated appropriation of $1 million beginning in fiscal 2019, but this was altered by Chapter 97 of 2025, raising the mandated appropriation to $2.5 million. To fulfill the responsibilities established under Chapter 26, in February 2025, 6 positions were created by the Board of Public Works to staff the FAU. Beginning in March 2025, FAU was fully staffed with 5 attorneys and 1 paralegal, with the unit taking advantage of a partnership with the New York University School of Law to bring in 4 attorney fellows. As you can see in Exhibit 8 on page 14, the state is engaged in 51 lawsuits against federal actions as of January 30th, 2026. On January 1st, 2026, OAG published its 2025 annual report, in which FAU was credited with preserving more than $100 million in education funding and more for other programs. OAG should discuss the federal funds that were preserved and which agencies and programs were impacted. Chapters 5 and 6 of 2023, or the Child Victims Act, repealed the statute of limitations on child sexual abuse lawsuits. Chapter 104 of 2025 altered the act by limiting the potential liability to a claimant from $890,000 to $400,000 if filed on or after June 1st, 2025. As of August 19th, 2025, OAG reported there to be about 11,000 plaintiffs who filed cases against the Department of Juvenile Services, the Department of Human Services, and the Maryland Department of Health, with a majority being filed before June 1st, 2025. Negotiations remain ongoing, but as of December 21st, 2025, payments to claimants have not begun while cases continue. OAG should comment on the number of plaintiffs who have filed cases under this act, the potential financial costs to the state, and the estimated timeline for current litigations and for payouts to begin. On page 15 are the recommended actions, and the Department of Legislative Services recommends reducing 2 new positions as OAG has 25.2 vacancies as of December 31st, 2025, reducing $100,000 in special funds for the purpose of in-state conferences and training, the adoption of committee narrative for MLSC regarding the operations and future costs of the AIDS program, and the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on the actions taken by the FAU. That concludes my presentation. I can now take your questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Benson. Any questions of the subcommittee for the DLS analysts? All right, seeing none, we will turn now to Attorney General Anthony Brown and his team. Welcome, Mr. Agee. Please take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Acevedo, and congratulations on your appointment as chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee. Members of the committee, it's an honor. For the record, I'm Attorney General Anthony Brown, here to discuss the budget of the Office of the Attorney General, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I'm accompanied by my Chief of Staff / Chief Operating Officer, Christian Barrera. He's here because I've learned over the 30 years of doing this work, never leave home without your subject matter expert. But he certainly can assist me in answering any questions. I want to thank Mr. Benson for the thorough analysis, and welcome to DLS and the OAG budget. We look forward to hosting you after session to further introduce you to the Office of the Attorney General. I have a few points that I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, but before I do, I wanted to focus in on one item in the analysis that takes up a lot of time because it's important, but it's not really an OAG budget issue, and that's the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. So as you, for example, on page 2, when it says that the general funds were increased in the OAG, that 3.6 is a pure pass-through. We don't touch it, modify it, influence it in any way. It's a pure pass-through. We actually thought, and I think we recommended last year that go over to the Department of Housing and Community Development, because they have now assumed the access to counsel and eviction sort of program project. But it's still a pass-through in our budget. But I just wanted to, so it's not sort of considered as a increase in my operating budget. So with that, I'll if I may, the Office of the Attorney General, we are close to 1,060 people, personnel, and of that, about 700 are attorneys. And the Office of the Attorney General, I'm responsible for recruiting, hiring, training, developing, and managing all of those personnel in both the enforcement work we do on behalf of the people of Maryland, consumer protection, antitrust, securities, civil rights, and also in the advice and counsel and representation to agency client units. But of that 1,060, only about 40 are on my budget. Yet much of my budget I spend on that personnel management of the other 600. So we're actually providing more services to more people than our budget reflects. And I'm happy to answer or clarify that. 400. Yeah, 400 on my budget, 1,000 I manage. The other 600 are on the budgets of the various agency clients, and you're going to hear from some of them today, and I fully support their budget. And I do want to point out that I'm very grateful, because every time we ask an agency client unit to support the agency client lawyers and paralegals in their department, I mean, without hesitation, they recognize the value that we provide. They recognize that they support them on their budget, and they're always willing to provide that support. So I want to thank my clients, those who are in the room and aren't in the room. We are socially responsible and fiscally prudent. I don't know if that's a term that still floats around in the General Assembly. I think about my good friend, our departed Pete Rawlins, former chair of Appropriations. But we like to think that we are in the Office of the Attorney General. This is the first year that we have spent fiscal year 25. We're now looking at fiscal year 25. We spent down to zero. We spend everything you give us. And the 87% of our budget is personnel. And what we spend down is to make sure we're investing in the technology infrastructure, the training of our personnel, and improving the way that we do business. I do want to thank the General Assembly and the governor for supporting the Federal Accountability Unit, which has, as you heard from Mr. Benson, we have filed over 50 actions in areas dealing with education, immigration, healthcare, justice and social service issues. And it's, in many ways, it's difficult to quantify the dollars recovered, the dollars saved, but in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In one case alone, we saved for our Department of Education over $100 million in grant funding. The AmeriCorps program, we saved the state about $12 to $16 million in that program alone. But it's hard to measure when we are successful in defending or actually bringing affirmative litigation against the federal administration, the Trump administration, that wants to, for example, require us to certify for transportation dollars that we will adhere to their immigration enforcement policies, that we will adhere to their distorted views on DEI. And when we fight that and we win, and we continue the funding stream of transportation dollars, it's hard to quantify what that amount is. But it's a lot, because, as you know, we've got a big transportation budget that relies on federal funding. So there are two asks that we're making of the Appropriations Committee. One is to create an enforcement recovery fund. It's House Bill 705. And as you know, In our enforcement actions in consumer protection, in antitrust, those civil penalties go to the general fund. Over the last several years, in the governor's budget, which has been approved by the General Assembly, more and more of our special funds have been used to offset our general funds. So we need a fund where we can capture some of those penalties to use in our enforcement action. More than happy to answer any questions you have on that. The second ask, and we understand the environment and the year in which we're making the ask, we're asking for modest fee increases in two areas. One is in securities. We have fees that haven't been raised since they've been established 30 years ago. Last year, and I want to thank you, you did raise broker-dealer fees. There was little, if any, pushback from the industry because I think they recognize the importance of a securities division that can regulate the market at the state level. So we're coming in and asking for additional consumer protection and securities fees that haven't been raised in a long time. Addressing some of the DLS comments, and again, it's in our written testimony in much greater detail. I would ask that you do not cut the $100,000 for training. We have invested a lot of time and energy in the last 3 years to build a training system in the OAG that did not exist. We now have a 12-hour mandatory continuing education requirement in the OAG, which reflects the profession. It's not a mandatory requirement in the legal profession. It is in other states, but it is an aspirational goal. It is now mandatory in the OAG. We've implemented technology to deliver training, micro-training, in-person training, virtual training. We track it. The law is changing, and we need to ensure that our attorneys are staying up to date. In fact, if you did the simple math, the $100,000 recommended cut, that's $100 per employee. So we're asking you to reject the recommendation of the $100,000 cut. There's a recommendation to delete two new positions, one in consumer protection and one is the People's Insurance Council. Regarding the People's Insurance Council, that is funded by assessments through the insurance industry. It does not impact the general fund. So to the extent that you're looking, and I know that you need to look for ways to reduce general funding expenditures, this won't help you. This is a special funded position. It won't help you in that regard. And the second position is the Consumer Protection Division, an attorney in the home builder registration. And I know that you get calls all the time from your constituents about consumer protection issues. Perhaps the biggest investment that a family makes is investment in their home. And you, the General Assembly, created this home builder registration to make sure that our home builders build by standards, are held accountable, and right now we have a 280 case backload at the Office of the Administrative Hearings. So I need that attorney to be able to help adjudicate those cases on behalf of our shared constituents. With that, I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and open to questions or clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Any questions from the subcommittee for this panel? Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've since lost the, oh, I did find it. Okay. I had a question coming off of page 8. Good to see you, Mr. Attorney General. On page 8 in Exhibit 4, they're talking about the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit cases. I was curious, based on this data, if you also have what is the general life cycle of these cases? So how many months is it taking for something to be dealt with, or how many weeks or days or whatever? I was just trying to get some average or some range of what.
We don't have that. We can get it.
We'll get that to you. We don't have that. I would not be surprised when we get you that information, which we do track, that it's not weeks or months, but it's over 1 year. I don't want to say years, but these are often lengthy, complicated investigations and either settlements or prosecutions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, Mr. Agee, you first appreciate all the work that you and your team are doing to not just hold this administration accountable, but also a lot of the suits that you all have initiated against major private companies who, whether it's Uber or some other major organization, and I think it includes the cargo ship company, but it is clear that your office is doing certainly a lot more and more resources are needed. You had alluded to in your testimony, House Bill, I believe it was 705 by the Vice Chair, and I certainly sounds like a measure that I'd be supportive of. Just curious, because on the flip side of that, you do have the OPD that also is certainly in need of additional resources, and just hopefully, we could find some sort of a compromise or amendment where some of those resources could also go to the OPD to ensure that they have what they need in order to fulfill their constitutional function. So happy to chat with you a little bit more about it. It's House Bill 705, I believe. Yeah.
Yep, and thank you for sponsoring that, Mr. Vice.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly a measure I support. Just want to make sure, you all have resources, and also the OPD's office as well. But other than that, any other questions for AG? Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair.
Not so much a question, just saluting you again. I appreciate the work that you've been doing. Of course, the Trump administration has been targeting our state, so just appreciate you being there to not only play defense, but also to go on the offensive as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. AG. Thank you to your team. Yep, that concludes the hearing on the Office of the Attorney General. Next, we will have the Department of Social and Economic Mobility. We will start with our DLS analyst, Ms. Natalie Andrade, followed by Secretary Walter Simmons and his team. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I am Natalie Andrade, and I'm here with the Department of Legislative Services to present the Fiscal 27 allowance for the Department of Social and Economic Mobility, or DOSEM. DOSEM was established by Chapter 605 of 2025 as a principal department in the executive branch to coordinate, monitor, and advance social equity initiatives across state government. The department consolidates the Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs, OSBA, the Office of Social Equity, OSE, and the Office of Minority Business Enterprises, OMBE. The department is responsible for supporting agencies and businesses in implementing social equity policies, tracking and evaluating performance, and improving coordination across programs. As you can see on page 1 of the analysis, the fiscal 27 allowance totals $20.8 million. This represents an increase of $4.2 million, or 25.6% compared to the fiscal 26 working appropriation. Turning to page 2 of the analysis, fiscal 26 reflects the transfer of staff and funding from OSBA, OSE, and OMBE into the newly created department. Budget amendments realign positions and funding from multiple agencies to implement Chapter 605. Section 21 of the fiscal 26 budget bill added $2.2 million in general funds and 9 regular positions in the statewide account contingent on enactment of the legislation. So DOSEM should comment on whether the 9 regular positions have been filled. On page 3 of the analysis, Exhibit 1 shows a breakdown of the fiscal 27 budget. The Office of Social Equity totals $8.9 million, or 43% of the total budget. The Office of Minority Business Enterprises totals $6.7 million, or 32%. The Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs totals $2.7 million, or 13% of the budget. Finally, the Office of the Secretary totals $2.4 million, or 12%. On pages 4 and 5, Exhibit 2 discusses the proposed budget change. The fiscal 27 allowance increases by $4.2 million compared to the fiscal 26 working appropriation. The increase is primarily driven by personnel expenses, including reclassifications associated with the staff realignment under the new agency, as well as increases in health insurance and salary-related costs. Additional increases support reevaluation of disadvantages business, enterprise, and airport concession certification applications within OMBE, software licenses and maintenance, and external consulting services. Page 5 also discusses a provision in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act that could expand the allowable uses of the Cannabis Business Assistance Fund to include up to $5 million for DOSEM operating costs. The fiscal 27 budget as introduced for DOSEM includes $5 million from the CBAF and a corresponding $5 million general fund reduction, contingent on the enactment of legislation expanding the allowable uses of the CBAF to include general agency operations. On page 6 of the analysis, the personnel section shows that the fiscal 27 allowance includes 71 regular positions and 7.5 contractual FTEs for a total of 78.5 positions. As of December 31st of 2025, the department reported 14 vacant regular positions, representing 20% of the authorized regular position. Beginning on page 7, the first key observation discusses the organization of the department. A total of 4 offices comprise DOSEM, including the Office of the Secretary to provide executive leadership and administrative oversight for the department. OSBA promotes a small minority and women-owned business participation in state government and administers the Minority Business Enterprise Program, or MBE, a Small Business Reserve Program, or SBR, and the Veteran-Owned Small Business Program. OSZ is responsible for advancing social equity initiatives associated with the state's regulated cannabis program and administers the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, or CRF, and the Social Equity Partnership Program, SEP. MBE is responsible for certification and decertification of minority business enterprises, or MBEs, and related entities, including those required under federal transportation programs. On page 8 of the analysis, Exhibit 3 shows minority business enterprise participation attainment from fiscal 21 through fiscal 25. Participation increased from 17.1% in fiscal 2021 to a peak of 21.8% in fiscal 2024, before declining to 19.1% in fiscal 2025. Participation remained below the 29% statewide goal in each year. OSBA attributes the persistent gap to limited monitoring capacity at agencies, a constrained pool of certified MBEs in certain industries, and the composition of state procurement spending, including a large of specialized contracts with limited subcontracting opportunities. On page 9, Exhibit 4 shows a small business reserve participation attainment over the same period. Participation ranged from 7.7% to 11.6% and remained below the 15% statewide goal. OSBA indicated that participation has been affected by reporting and certification timing issues, as well as limitation in a small business reserve designation of procurements. On page 10, Exhibit 5 shows that outreach and training events increased between fiscal 2021 and fiscal 2025, particularly for small businesses. Despite this expansion in outreach activity, participation outcomes have remained below statutory goals, and the agency notes that staffing, resource constraint, and limited agency-level compliance capacity continue to affect the translation of outreach activity into higher participation outcomes. Also, beginning on page 10 and continued on to page 11, the analysis discusses the agency MBE participation attainment survey. Agencies identify a limited staffing capacity, insufficient vendor pools, and lack of automation as barriers to real-time compliance monitoring. OSBA reported implementing enhanced compliance monitoring practices, including annual assessments and expanded training. Beginning on page 11, the analysis discusses implementation of the Social Equity Partnership Program, SEP, and the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, CRF. For SEP, although $5 million is authorized annually beginning in fiscal 2025, none of the funds were expended or encumbered in fiscal 2025. OSD finalized regulations, developed the application portal, and conducted stakeholder engagement by delayed formal program launch based on feedback regarding timing and incentives. So the department should discuss the anticipated launch timeline for the SEP, identify any remaining administrative or programmatic steps required prior to implementation, and whether it expects to expend the full $5 million in authorized funding in fiscal 2026. On page 12, the analysis discusses the CRF implementation. The CRF distributes cannabis-related revenues to counties based on statutory allocation percentages tied to disproportionately impacted areas. Many counties use fiscal 2025 for planning activities, including community engagement and needs assessment, rather than direct expenditures. As of March 2025 reporting cycle, most counties had not reported CRF expenditures, and Baltimore and Wycomico counties were the only jurisdictions reporting spending during fiscal 2025. So the agency should comment on the expected timing for increased CRF expenditures at the county level and describe any factors that may affect the pace of fund utilization in fiscal 26 and subsequent years. To conclude, on page 14, the Department of Legislative Services recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for our DLS analysts? Seeing none, welcome Secretary Simmons. To you and your team, you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Of the subcommittee, the following testimony is provided on behalf of the Department of Social and Economic Mobility, and we thank you for having us here today. I'm Walter Simmons, Acting Secretary of the Department of Social and Economic Mobility. With the newness of our agency and the questions and integrations, I do have several staff with me, our Chief of Staff, Laura Gutierrez, and our Administrative Director, Pamela Gregory. Also in the gallery behind me, if they could acknowledge themselves when I call their name, Executive Director of the Office of Social Equity, Audrey Johnson, our Small Business Competitiveness Administrator for the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, Heather McCall, our Economic Opportunity Administrator for the Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, Lisa Mitchell-Sinar, our Chief of External Affairs, Artie Kamali, and our Legislative and Policy Director, Davon Gardner. We thank you for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee this year for your review for the proposed budget. We'd also like to thank our budget analyst, Ms. Natalie Andrade, for her hard work and acknowledgement of our efforts through this analysis. We know it wasn't easy as a new agency, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. Through the transition, we were using staffing and admin and budget. We heavily relied on the governor's office, governor's finance office. So I'd also like to thank Mona Vadea and Director Lily Zimmerman, the director and deputy director Lily Zimmerman, for their help during this time. I'm happy to say that we did hire, related to the vacancies, our HR director several weeks ago. Pamela's been up to speed, so hopefully we will start moving forward with operating independently in the coming months. To do a little introduction to DOSM, Speaker Emeritus, Speaker Adrian Jones' legacy bill, House Bill 1253, established our department, and we now are comprised of the Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, previously in the Governor's Office, the Office of Social Equity, an independent agency functioning within the Maryland Cannabis Administration, and the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, previously at MDOT. Our goal is to facilitate an economic mobility ecosystem that we previously presented about that really ensures every Marylander has access to work, wages, and wealth. When I first came to present in front of the subcommittee, I shared a little bit about the perfect storm that we encountered launching on October 1st, which preceded 2 days later one of the most significant changes to the country's disadvantaged business enterprise program, the interim final rule on October 3rd. We've then moved forward with working to address those and working with the legislature and working with the governor's office, while also preparing for the MBE reauthorization that is before the House this year. All of that included creating and transitioning those 3 offices and creating this new agency, as well as identifying the vision that aligned with House Bill 1253. We have established 5 priority focus areas, which is establishing an organizational infrastructure, establishing an operational infrastructure, streamlining key performance indicators, telling our story and engaging with our community partners through an internal and external stakeholder engagement strategy, along with really developing the foundation of our economic mobility ecosystem. This week, I mentioned this in our last hearing, we did get approval from the governor's office. So using this local approach, we have implemented regions in the Department of Social and Economic Mobility to increase local participation and local feedback in what we build and lead for all Marylanders. They're comprised of 6 regions: Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, the Upper Shore, the Lower Shore, Northern Maryland, and Central Maryland. We hope, Chair, as you discussed last time, that this is an opportunity for our staff to engage with our local partners, engage with our community, and really come with community-based solutions that they can agree to and hope really increase the impact in the work that we're doing. As you can see, we have a lot to do, have done a lot in the last 4 months, but there's a lot more to do. But we embrace the challenge to help Marylanders live in a more inclusive and equitable state, again, ultimately ensuring every Marylander has access to work, wages, and wealth. Related to the DLS report, I would like to take the opportunity to give a few factual differences between the data presented and what's collected by our office. I think these are things that we will work on in the establishment and where the reporting comes from in the coming months. But the 2025 annual report for the Office of Small, Minority, and Women's Business Affairs, which provides verified data for the MBE program, our Small Business Reserve, and our veteran-owned small business enterprise programs, awards and payments, was published on February 12th of this year and is available in the DLS library. Related to that report from the Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs, the report notes attainment for FY25 published through the MFR, that those numbers are estimates, given that the data is not finalized by the time the MFR collection closes, while the most accurate data comes out of that report. And I want to highlight that this was a record-breaking year in payments to MBEs for the state of Maryland. MBEs were paid $2.2 billion, the highest amount ever paid in Maryland history to minority business enterprises. Our data also shows that the small business reserve participation attainment reached 15% in FY25, while MFR data suggests that this level has not been met in the preceding 5 fiscal years. We did achieve the set-aside. Additionally, the set-aside will increase to 20% for the next fiscal year and subsequent years. Lastly, I'd like to highlight the consistent and successful outreach by our Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. Our VSBE, Veteran Small Business Enterprise Program, surpassed 1,000 certified veteran businesses this year, and all programs had an increase in newly certified businesses. I think these are things that we can work on regarding data and reporting as we formalize the structure. In closing, our written testimony is before you, and on behalf of the Department of Social and Economic Mobility and our dedicated team, we thank the Department of Legislative Services for their concurrence on the governor's allowance budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions from the subcommittee. Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, my question has to do more broadly with your agency than what was maybe here, but being that you're a creation from 3 other places originally and brought together, can you speak to how the current organization is a plus both on the policy side of what you do, but also for the efficiency for our taxpayers?
Sure. On the plus side, a lot of what we're looking at now is really having a specialized focus on the specific works related to social and economic mobility. To give you an idea, traditionally in some of these rooms, the staff member in previous offices had one person that might have provided 3 to 6 different goals. If we asked them, they'd probably say 10 to 15 different functions. Now you're seeing teams of people. So we now have a policy team that's inclusive of 3 areas. Our communications and outreach team is inclusive of 4 to 5 positions. This is allowing us to pool really different specified functions in each of these offices that can now be pulled together to increase our impact, increase our operation, but also increase our focus. So there's been several points of data that's been requested by your colleagues, that's been requested by your colleagues in the Senate, And as we start elevating and talking through, a lot of times we're hearing from some of our other agencies related to data and questions. Wow, this is the first time that's been brought up. And I think the reason why is now we have allocated staff and resources to really dive into the data, dive into the gaps of our frontline state staff, and at an executive level work to address them, because we have the resources as one agency to address those. And I think ultimately going into our efficiency and operations, that will lead to increased impact to residents. On the operations side, what does that look like? It looks like what our Office of Minority Business Enterprise and our Office of Small Minority Women Business Affairs, really combining those efforts instead of you all having to go to two different agencies, but also Maryland businesses having to go through two different agencies to get answers. Now they're under one house. Now these staff can really work together to collaborate. And that also goes into our outreach and engagement numbers on being able to identify what reports are pulling from what agencies and what numbers, and now really hopefully making the job easier for our DLS staff and you all to get this information in a more efficient and accurate place.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Kaiser. Vice Chair Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, agency, the way you have, and I commend you for the work you've done and the progress, so on and so forth. My question, we were speaking offline about it briefly, is about the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, specifically Exhibit 6 on page 13. If you could just talk for the public about the formula behind how this $88 million fund is distributed.
Sure. With the Cannabis Reform Act, we really had to, Office of Social Equity, led by our Executive Director, Audrey Johnson, really had to work with her team in the Maryland Cannabis Administration to understand how we would identify the impact and of cannabis in the past year. So one, we had to pull most recent data and identify what that data meant. So we looked at, and the team looked at, a 10-year average on cannabis possession charges. The most recent data was 2010 to 2022. And through that data, they then took this to average of what those possession charges were in the state and decided to create a formula that identified an area that had above 150% of the state average and used that formula to disperse the funds. When you look at that formula using the most recent data at the time, which is 2010 through 2022, and looking at that data set, they identified the top areas. Ultimately, the top areas based on those possessions reaching 150% above the state average was Baltimore City, followed by Baltimore County, and then Prince George's, and then the other counties subsequently. But at the time, we used that about 10, 12-year data of cannabis possession charges and then identified 150% above the average of the state charges would help create the formula to allocate funds to the individual jurisdictions.
Appreciate that explanation there. It just pops out on the sheet here, and so I wanted to bring this up, and I appreciate the work. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the subcommittee for the Secretary and his team? Seeing none, Secretary Simmons, congratulations again. All the best to your team. Appreciate you all being here. And that ends the budget hearing on the Department of Social and Economic Mobility. Next, we will have the Department of Veterans and Military Families. We will begin with our DLS analyst, Ms. Yashadara Rai, followed by Eth Rothstein, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans and Military Families. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Rai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I am Yashodhara Rai, and I'll be presenting the fiscal 27 budget analysis for the Department of Veterans and Military Families, or DVMF. The graph on page 1 shows that the fiscal 27 budget for DVMF increases by about $228,000 or 0.3%. Turning to page 2, there are 4 proposed fiscal 26 deficiency appropriations for a total of $5.2 million. This includes $1.3 million in general funds to align funding with increased Charlotte Hall Veterans Home, CHVH, resident census in fiscal 25, about $305,000 in general funds for IT costs, and $250,000 in general funds for additional support for veterans who were impacted by the federal shutdown in October last year. Of the $250,000 in additional support, $125,000 was transferred to the Veterans Trust Fund, $105,000 to Operation Homefront, $15,000 to the Blue Star Families Maryland chapter, and $5,000 to the Maryland National Guard Food Pantry. The remaining proposed deficiency appropriation includes a total of $2.3 million in special funds and $1 million in federal funds, which are available from prior year retained special and federal funds. On page 3, Exhibit 1 shows a total of $68.7 million in the department's fiscal 27 allowance. $50.4 million, or 73.5% of the total allowance, is for the Veterans Home Program. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the changes in proposed budget. The largest growth of $1.6 million is related to the increase in personnel expenses. This is offset by the reduction of about $1,400 million, which is related to the net reductions in expenses for Charlotte Hall after accounting for the proposed deficiencies. Personnel data appears on page 5. One position was abolished in fiscal 26 due to the voluntary separation program. The fiscal 27 allowance includes a net reduction of one contractual position. The allowance also includes an increase of $437,000 for annual salary review adjustments. And as of December 31st, 2025, there were 6 vacant positions in the department, which is within the budgeted turnover in fiscal 27. Moving on to key observations, Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows that Charlotte Hall's occupancy has increased as of December 2025 compared to 2024, but is still operating under capacity. As was discussed in Exhibit 2 earlier, the fiscal 27 allowance for Charlotte Hall decreases by 3.6%. This is after accounting for the proposed deficiencies. And since the resident census is increasing, DVMF should comment on how the department plans to fund operating costs if the upward trend in resident census continues. The bottom of page 7 highlights the 3 quarterly reports DVMF has submitted. The 4th report is due in April of this year. In its first and second quarterly report, DVMF reported an overall federal rating of 1 star for Charlotte Hall. In its third report, DVMF reported an overall federal rating of 4 stars, with staff receiving 5 stars, health inspections receiving 3 stars, and quality receiving 2 stars. DVMF should comment on what actions resulted in significant improvement from an overall federal rating of 1 star to 4 stars. Additionally, the 3 quarterly reports also listed a total of 108 complaints. Of these, 70 complaints were from the residents and 38 complaints were family concerns. An annual recertification survey report was submitted on September 10th, 2025. This noted that Charlotte Hall was not in compliance with some of the federal regulations. The department should brief on corrective measures taken to address these non-compliances. Another annual survey of Charlotte Hall's resident funds was conducted and no major issues were identified. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting the continued submission of quarterly reports for Charlotte Hall's progress. The bottom of page 8 highlights the Maryland Joint Forces Initiative, also called MJF. As required by committee narrative in the 2025 JCR, DVMF notes that MJF has formalized partnerships with 33 organizations as of December 2025. This is an increase of 13 organizations compared to last year's analysis. About 29,000 service members have been served. The department also plans to launch subcommittees for each of the 5 pillars that the initiative is based on, which are employment, food and housing, education, health and wellness, and volunteer services, in order to monitor the program's effectiveness and develop relevant performance indicators. DLS recommends adopting a committee narrative for a progress report on MGF and the 5 pillar-based subcommittees. Page 9 discusses the two capital projects, the Crownsville Veterans Cemetery Expansion and Improvements Phase 4 project and the Garrison Forest Veterans Cemetery Expansion and Improvements Phase 6 project. No capital funding is requested for fiscal 27, which is why we are discussing this in the operating analysis. And this is due to delays in the completion of design, permitting, and other supporting documents. DVMF has also revised scope of work for both the projects, and DVMF should comment on the reason for removing certain components for both Veterans Cemetery projects and provide a timeline for completing the pending scheduled work to compete for the federal fiscal 2028 federal grant. Page 11 highlights that no federal award for the new state Veterans Home project was made and the project has been canceled. Language in the calendar 25 capital budget bill restricted $62.9 million general obligation bonds in two capital projects and was contingent on the state receiving conditional federal award prior to June 1st, 2026. This contingent language is removed in the calendar 26 capital budget bill as introduced. On pages 12 and 13 are DLS's two recommended actions for various reports. Pages 14 and 15 are appendices, and this is the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rai. Any questions of the subcommittee for our DLS analysts? Okay, seeing none at this time, I'd like to welcome Secretary Ed Rothstein and his team. Secretary Rothstein, if you don't mind introducing the person to your left, are you a Marion Charlin by chance? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure.
Yep,
all right.
She is Elaine Charlin.
Awesome. Whenever you're ready, Secretary.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And thank you, Chair Acevero and Vice Chair Ivey and other members of the subcommittee. For the record, I am Ed Rothstein. I am the Secretary of your Department of Veterans and Military Families. And I shared a joint here with Elena, but also have an awesome team behind me and where they're working today. I am just blessed. And thank you so much, Yasha, for all the work that you've done. You did a great job describing the projects that we have been doing and that we see doing in the future. Over the past 6 months, it's been my privilege to be your secretary in leading the DVMF and strengthening our services for Maryland's military-connected community. Our vision is pretty simple here in Maryland, and that's to be the best state in the nation to serve all of our veterans and military families across this great state. We've processed more than 5,500 VA claims this past year, free of charge, resulting in over $54.5 million in direct payments to our veterans. We've broadened the reach of the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund and awarded over $800,000 this year, and shared by the analyst, we were able to provide $250,000 on Veterans Day for those with food inadequacies and challenges during the federal shutdown. And in Charlotte Hall, as shared, we went from a 1-star rated CMS quality rating to 4-star rating in the last rating that came out, I think, in December 2025. Reinforcing our commitment to safe, high-quality, long-term care. And I would like to make one correction. The capital budget, the money for the Sykesville home or the next home is not in the capital budget as shared by the analyst, but the program itself is not canceled. It's a federally funded program. It's around priority 77 in the top tier, but money's trickling down to the programs at the federal level that it doesn't make sense to keep that money in our capital budget at this time. But the program's not gone. We just have to figure out how to influence the federal government to put the money back in the program and get Sykesville home up and running. With your support and the governor's allowance, we can build upon the work to modernize and better serve Maryland's veterans, service members, and their families. We recognize that you had many budget presentations here today. I want to respect your time. We've answered the analysis questions in the submitted testimony and are here in full support of the governor's allowance. I'll be glad to end it there and answer any questions that you may have. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Any questions for the Secretary and his team? Delegate Chang.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and congratulations on your recent confirmation. With regards to the Sykesville location, is that still the priority, or is there other areas of the state that are being identified? Recently, within the past couple of years, the Public Safety Subcommittee did a visit to Charlotte Hall, and we've taken a look at different maps of where the veterans live within our state. And my thought is wondering if the Sykesville location is still the primary, or if there's other parts of the state that could benefit from a new home. Thank you very much.
No, I appreciate the question, and bottom line up front, Sykesville is still the priority. There are other locations across the state that would be great to serve our aging veterans. The Sykesville location was decided a handful of years back under Secretary Owings, and we've done some A&E work already on the Sykesville home by my predecessor. It's been identified the cost of what the Sykesville home would be, so I'm going to continue to push the federal government to raising the priority for their capital allowances to get the Sykesville home up and running. But I do appreciate the question, because it's not just about brick and mortar, it's about serving our senior veterans across the state, and there are other locations that we're also looking at, so thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for providing additional feedback, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to ask an additional question. From the data that we have with the agency, where is most of the population within our state located with regards to the senior veterans?
The highest population of veterans right now is in Prince George's County, which would make sense. Montgomery County, Anne Arundel County. The largest per capita is St. Mary's County, where we do have Charlotte Hall. So, but so that's the short answer up front.
Great, thank you. And that confirms the maps that what the subcommittee had seen in the past years, and that's why the questions with regards to, as far as the investment that's being looked at in Sykesville compared to the other areas of the state where those populations are pretty robust with regards to the senior veterans. So I think if maybe we can continue that conversation, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Just to follow up very quickly on that, part of the decision-making process when Sykesville was identified, it is state property. So it is DGS property already owned by the state. And I know that was one of the, thoughts as the decision was made. It's also in the southern part of Carroll County and Howard County, so you have two very large populations there. But agree that we do need to continue to look across the state.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Chang. Delegate Beecham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering the approximate cost of the house. I haven't had a chance to read over this, and I was just curious as to what.
Total cost of the house right now would be about $198 million, $200 million, 2/3 paid by federal government with 1/3 paid by the state.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Seeing no other questions from members of the committee, that ends the hearing.
Sounds great.
On the Department of Veterans and Military Families. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary. Wonderful. Colleagues, we're going to move on to Maryland Department of Emergency Management. Ms. Rye, you can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, I am Yashodhara Rai, and I'll be presenting the fiscal 27 budget analysis for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, or MDEM. The graph on page 1 shows that the fiscal 27 budget for MDEM increases by $65.6 million or 7.5%. This is after accounting for proposed deficiencies and contingent reductions. Turning to page 2, there are 3 proposed fiscal 26 deficiency appropriations for a total of $430,000. This includes $400,000 in special funds from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, or SEIF. This is contingent on a provision in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, BRFA, of 2026 that expands allowable uses of SEIF. Another $30,000 in general funds as deficiency is included to support rent expenses. The third proposed deficiency is a fund swap that reduces $3.2 million in federal funds and adds $3.2 million in special funds from the 911 Trust Fund and is also applied to fiscal 27 allowance. This deficiency is also contingent on a BRFA provision that expands allowable uses of 911 Trust Funds. The allowable uses of 911 trust funds are set federally and restricted to 911 services. The implementation of this BRFA provision may lead to a non-compliance with the federal regulations. MDEM and the Department of Budget and Management, DBM, are working to resolve potential legal issues. MDEM should comment on how it plans to cover $3.2 million in reduced federal funds if the proposed BRFA provision to expand allowable uses of 911 trust funds cannot be implemented. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows a total of $944.2 million in the department's fiscal 27 allowance after accounting for contingent reductions. 73% of the allowance relate to pass-through federal grants, mainly for presidentially declared disasters. A breakdown of these pass-through federal grants is shown in Exhibit 2 on page 4, along with the grant category. Pages 5 through 7 highlights impacts of the recent federal changes for these grant categories, which include the denial of the state's request for a major disaster declaration for flooding in Western Maryland last year. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the total federal disaster aid the state has received from fiscal 2010 to 2025. This excludes any COVID-related assistance. On an average, the state has received $21.4 million per year over the reporting period. No federal disaster aid was received in fiscal 24 and 25. MDEM should comment on how it plans to continue its operations if federal funds are further reduced, and DLS recommends adopting a committee narrative for a report on federal fund sources and the department's contingency plan if these federal funds are not available as anticipated. To support costs related to disasters, the state maintains 2 funds, the Catastrophic Event Account, which is administered by DBM, and the State Disaster Recovery Fund, which is administered by MDEM. In December 2025, the Spending Affordability Committee, SAC, recommended that the state maintain a total of at least $15 million in the 2 funds. The total closing balance at the end of fiscal 27 for the 2 funds is expected to be $12.9 million, which is $2.1 million less than the recommendation. MDEM and DBM should comment on how the agencies plan to maintain the total combined balance of $15 million for the 2 funds. Exhibit 4 on pages 8 and 9 show the proposed budget change. 98% or $64.6 million of the budget increase is attributable to the rise in grants supported by 911 surcharge revenue for county shares. MDEM should comment on the reason for the significant increases in these grants. The bottom of page 9 highlights 2 BRFA provisions. The first BRFA provision expands allowable uses of SEIF to include programs and initiatives related to resiliency efforts. This provision swaps a total of $1.5 million, which includes $305,000 in general funds and $1.2 million in federal funds, with special funds from SEIF. DLS recommends amending the contingent budget bill language to align more closely with the BRFA provision. Another BRFA provision expands the allowable uses of 911 trust funds, which we discussed earlier in the presentation. Personnel data appears at the top of page 10. One new administrator position is added in fiscal 27, and as of December 31st, 2025, MDEM reported 13 vacant positions, of which 2 positions have been vacant for more than a year. DLS recommends deleting the 1 new position and instead reclassifying one of the existing long-term vacant positions. Moving on to the first key observation, Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund, RMRLF, is a special non-lapsing fund that provides low or non-interest loans for local resiliency projects. The fiscal 23 budget included $25 million in pay-as-you-go general funds for this fund. MDEM spent $10.1 million in fiscal 25, of which $10 million was awarded to 2 Howard County projects. This is shown in Exhibit 5 on page 11. MDEM also received $6.5 million in federal funds in fiscal 25 that are yet to be spent. The estimated current fund balance is $14.3 million, including interest earnings. MDEM has received loan applications for 5 other projects. MDEM should comment on the status of the 2 projects that received RMRLF in fiscal 25, status of the remaining 5 projects, planned utilization of the $6.5 million in federal funds, and the agency's plan to apply for federal fiscal 25 funds. DLS recommends adopting a committee narrative with the similar details. The second key observation on the state and local cybersecurity efforts begin at the bottom of page 12. These efforts are supported by the federal, state, and local cybersecurity grant program, which is funded through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. This program was originally for a 4-year federal fiscal year cycle and was supposed to end in federal fiscal 25. As part of the recent federal spending authorization, this program has now been extended through September 2026. MDEM acts as the state administrative agency for this program and should ensure that 80% of the federal grant is provided to local governments. Exhibit 6 on page 13 shows the federal grants received from federal fiscal years 22 through 24. A total of $4.9 million of the federal grant received in federal fiscal 23 was awarded to local projects. Details of these projects are in Appendix 4. Application process for federal fiscal 24 is expected to begin in early calendar 26. MDEM should comment on awarding of the federal fiscal 24 awards. And DLS recommends adopting a committee narrative for a report on the program and fund distribution. The third key observation appears on page 14 and highlights the repeat finding from the Office of Legislative Audit, OLA, which was reported in its final 25 budget, fiscal 25 budget closeout transactions. OLA reported that MDEM was unable to provide documentation for a total of $86 million in accrued federal fund revenue entries or recovery of these funds. Of this, $77.9 million were for expenditures made on behalf of other state agencies that need to be approved by the respective agencies, which enables MDEM to request federal reimbursement. The report noted that some of these expenses dated back to July 2020, and as of September 2025, these expenditures were not approved by the agencies and no federal reimbursement request had been made. The deadline to request federal reimbursement was December 29, 2025. MDEM should update on how much of the $86 million has been recovered and whether the agencies have approved requests for federal reimbursement. DLS recommendations appear on pages 15 through 19. Recommendation 1 deletes funding for 1 new position. Recommendations 2 through 6 modifies budget bill language to closely align with BRFA provision. Recommendations 7 through 9 are committee narratives for various reports. And recommendations 10 through 12 modifies budget bill language for fiscal 26 proposed deficiencies to closely align with BRFA provision. Exhibit 7 on pages 20 and 21 provides an update on the IIJA grants as of January 2026. Pages 22 through 28 are appendices, and this is the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rye. Colleagues, any questions for our budget analysts? Seeing none, we're going to move to Secretary Strickland from the Department of Emergency Management. Mr. Secretary, take us away.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Ivey. Members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. And for the record, I am Russell Strickland, Secretary of the Department of Emergency Management. I appreciate the opportunity to update the committee on the department's activities and address the items contained in the operating budget analysis prepared by the Department of Legislative Services. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Yashu, our new DLS budget analyst for this fiscal year, who has worked hard to understand the intricacies of our budget. Accompanying me today is Deputy Secretary Chaz Eby and our Director of Mission Support, Janet Moncrief, who will be available to answer questions as needed. You do have our written responses to the DLS analysis, and I want to be respectful of your time today, but given the recent attention on national emergency management policy and the impact of federal actions on states and locals, I wanted to take a moment to update you on what we know at this time. Federal grants. As DLS notes in our analysis, MDEM relies primarily on federal grants for staffing, equipment, training, and exercises related to disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Over the last year, we have worked closely with the Attorney General's office on several lawsuits challenging changes made by USDHS to these grants, which would have harmed Maryland's preparedness, response, and disaster risk reduction activities at both the state and local levels. We are happy to report that those lawsuits were successful in overturning the most impactful changes, including the restoration of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program and requiring the administration to remove newly added terms and conditions to our preparedness grants, which have been challenging to meet the state and local need. Unfortunately, the news is not all positive. Preparedness grants to the National Capital Region were slashed by nearly 50%, reducing the award from $44 million last year to $25 million this year. And Maryland State Homeland Security Grant Award was also decreased from $6.3 million to $4.9 million. And while one of the lawsuits Maryland joined successfully prohibited the termination of the BRIC grant program, BRIC is a largely competitive program. We have not received any updates from FEMA on the future of this program or anticipated award dates for open grant years, leaving a number of jurisdictions in limbo. Federal disaster assistance policy. Maryland has also experienced what appears to be a shift in federal practice, if not in formal policy, for federal disaster assistance. In previous years, if a state and local government met federally established damage thresholds or events outlined in the Stafford Act, federal disaster was nearly guaranteed to follow. Federal disaster has always been at the sole discretion of the president by law, but FEMA's established parameters provided benchmarks for disaster assistance. States and locals have planned around these federally established benchmarks for years, assuming responsibility for any and all disasters which don't hit those thresholds. Based on our experience in Western Maryland and other experiences around the nation, it appears that meeting these damage thresholds will no longer guarantee federal assistance. MDEM is acutely aware of these shifts and is working closely with key state agencies, including DBM, as well as local governments, the private sector, and nonprofits to assess our current capabilities, our potential gaps, and how Maryland can best prepare our response and recovery efforts in light of the unpredictable nature of federal disaster aid. State and local responsibility for disaster response. There's been a lot of national dialogue about shifting the responsibility of disasters, quote unquote, back where it belongs with states and locals. That does a disservice to the local responders and states which respond to the majority of the events impacting their community that never make it to the federal disaster aid request process. In just the last year, MDEM has responded to natural disasters like flooding and winter storms, technological interruptions like the recent national Verizon outage, and environmental emergencies like the fuel spill in Baltimore City Harbor. MDEM cannot replace FEMA, but we are committed to serving the residents of the state and in working in tandem with local governments to reduce risk to communities, to coordinate the state's response, and to recover to disasters. I want to thank the committee for this opportunity to provide these updates on federal actions impacting the state's emergency management system, and I, with our staff, are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Colleagues, any questions? Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you. Thank you, Secretary Strickland, for being here and for your service. On page 2 and 3 of the DLS report, where they talk about the 911 trust fund and the moving of the money, I understand the fund swap. I understand, I believe, the federal challenge and how it has to be in the BRFA. What I want to ask is something a little bit different, but related to that transfer of money is, what is it then otherwise happening with that 911 trust fund money? Would it have, what's the loss there? What would they have spent it on otherwise?
It would have been money, it is money available to local jurisdictions to support the 911 system throughout the state. So they come to the 911 board with projects, and those projects are awarded money specific to that jurisdiction, or they may come in with a project that is multi-jurisdictional that can work across the board, and they have a tiered system of how they go through awarding those projects.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Delegate Kaiser, for the question. Delegate Beecham.
Chair, I'm just curious, are you involved at all with the spill in the Potomac River?
Yes, we are.
All right. How's that coming along?
It's one of the most interesting events I've ever been involved with.
I can imagine.
It's coming. It's being addressed. The challenge with it is the source of the problem is owned by DC Water, which is a quasi-governmental agency with DC government, and it is on land that is in Maryland, but that particular land that is in Maryland is a federal park, so it's federal property. So we're working all those details at this time.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all the work that you do here for the state of Maryland. I know that DLS has a request in for your contingency plan if federal funds continue to fall through. It's my thought that it would probably look like what's happened in Western Maryland, which is we end up stepping up to do what needs to be done, so on and so forth. If you could speak to that specific issue there about the loss of federal funds and a possible contingency plan.
Well, and I think there are two areas to look at with that. One is our day-to-day operations really depends upon federal preparedness grants. So as those federal preparedness grants decreased, both we as a department as well as our local jurisdictions who also receive that money will end up not having all of the capabilities, or we're not able to sustain all of the capabilities that they may have developed and we may have developed to that point. So that's one side of it. The disaster amount is exactly as what happened in Western Maryland. We're going to have to address it. And there may be many different ways of which we're looking at to address it. We, thanks to you all, created a state disaster recovery fund within the last several years. Money can come out of that, then money can be moved from the contingency fund, catastrophic event fund, into the state disaster recovery fund. So that would be one source. And then another area to look at would be that revolving loan fund afterwards to do, particularly mitigation to prevent it in the future.
I'm saying here we receive about $700 million in federal funds.
That's a very large number.
Right.
And that is a lot of, majority of that is passed through based upon past disasters we've had, particularly COVID. We've processed close to $2 billion in COVID relief.
Oh, I was just illustrating for the greater public
I appreciate
how
that.
significantly we do lean on federal dollars. Colleagues, any other questions? Delegate Beecham.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, are we anywhere in sight as far as stopping the flow? I mean,
The flow is contained. Yeah, as far as it goes for the Potomac, right now, yes. I was in a meeting yesterday at the White House, and right now it is reported that the flow is contained. The damage has to be repaired.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Beecham. Any other questions? Seeing none, that ends the hearing for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. Thank you, Secretary Russell Strickland, for all the work that you do. We are here to continue with our partnership. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we're going to move on to the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. We have our budget analyst, Mr. Jacob Cash, and we will be hearing from Secretary Johnny Dorsey. Mr. Secretary and your team, you can approach. Mr. Cash, whenever you're ready, you don't have to run. You're fine. All right.
Thank you, Delegate Ivey. For the record, my name is Jacob Cash, and I'll be giving the budget presentation for the Department of Service and Civic Innovation, or DSCI. DSCI is one of the newer agencies in the government, combining existing volunteer programs with 2 service year option pathways established by the SERV Act and related legislation. If you join me on the cover page, you can see that the fiscal 2027 allowance is $70 million in total, although I want to point out much of the special funds are double counted with general funds. So if you look on page 2, Exhibit 1 shows what the budget more accurately looks like with that double count removed. The fiscal 2027 allowance increases by about $6.5 million, or 16%. On page 3, there's some information on federal dollars that were at risk due to the federal government canceling funding remaining in federal fiscal 2024 for some ongoing AmeriCorps, or for the ongoing AmeriCorps grant cycle. Court orders required AmeriCorps to reinstate that funding, and likewise, federal fiscal 2025 grant dollars were also at risk of not being awarded due to changes in federal priorities, but those funds have also since been awarded. Those funds support training and assistance for AmeriCorps programs statewide. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the overview of agency spending. The majority of this budget consists of Maryland Corps participation, stipends, completion awards, and wraparound services. That totals about $26.4 million. The Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism also administers about $6 million in federal grants, like I just mentioned, supporting volunteer work. And the remaining $15 million is for the administration of the various service programs within DSCI. Exhibit 3 on page 5 shows the proposed budget change of $15 million. I'll point out Maryland Corps grants account for the majority of the increase, including $7 million increasing for the mandated appropriation in the MSY Pathway Fund, as well as additional costs that are supported for YA pathway participation and the growth in that program. New positions that are also associated with the growth in that program account for about $1 million in additional funding. At the bottom on page 6 is a discussion of the YA pathway participation and the impact of proposed BRFA cuts. Current law requires DSCI to implement a target for YA participation, and while this does not represent a mandated appropriation, and so there is no associated contingent reduction, the BRFA provision was included to reduce participation targets that are used to establish the budget. So there's a reduction of 400 in fiscal 2027 and reduction of 450 in the next year. These reduced levels form the basis of the budget for Maryland Corps grants, as well as the positions that are added to maintain a consistent coach to participant ratio of 1:50. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the funding without double counts that is available in each year for the pathway programs. The current budget plan assumes consistent growth in grant funding and a large growth in administrative expenses related to new positions and miscellaneous contract expenses. The personnel data section begins on page 8. DSEI is adding 10 regular positions in fiscal 27, including 9 new service success coaches, as well as 1 administrator. Underpinning those projections is the ratio of 1 to 50 participants for a total of 1,200 participants within both pathways. These personnel changes add a total of $1 million in annual costs, and at the same time, there has been a decrease in vacancies in the department. There's 9 vacancies currently, only 1 of which is a service success coach directly working with the participants, and there are 6 administrative positions that are vacant. 6 administrators within Maryland Corps, excuse me, and the rest are within other units of the department. Furthermore, DSEI has not been meeting their participation goals. So Exhibit 5 on page 10 compares the goals to their final participation levels. There were goals of 300 for the first year, 650 for the second year, and 850 in that third class. However, DSEI has not been able to meet these goals, and in Class 3, DSEI started a rolling application process to increase their enrollment and allow for people to continue to be added to the program. At the start of Class 3, there were 588 participants who were matched with a host site partner. Although there were more applicants than the participation target that were deemed eligible for the program. By the end of October, DSEI was still off by about 155 participants, but they had filled they had enough unfilled host site partner slots to do so, to meet that target. DSEI has reached 758 participants by the end of calendar 2025, which is about 90% of the goal level for Class 3. All things considered, DLS recommends reducing the participation targets further by implementing a 1-year delay in the proposed target growth, allowing for more time to study the program, assess processes and relationships that need improvement, and reducing discretionary budget growth during these difficult fiscal times. And to accomplish this, DLS recommends reducing the additional Maryland Corps grant funding and new positions, which totals $8.5 million in general funds, $4.4 million in special funds, and $1 million in general funds for the new positions. The key observation section begins on page 11, and Exhibit 6 compares the 2 pathways to each other. Mandated appropriations are only applicable for the MSY pathway, while there's a participation target that is only applicable to the YA pathway. The application process is joint, and DSEI sorts applicants into each program based on their eligibility. And there was a piece of legislation last session that changed some of the requirements of each pathway, including allowing both pathway funds to be used for either program, changing eligibility by age and residency, and repealing the authorization for completion awards to be provided as Maryland 529 accounts. At the bottom of page 13 begins a discussion on the subsidization of wages by partner organization. Stipends are $15 an hour or the applicable minimum wage if higher, for instance, in some counties. And DSEI pays 2/3 of those costs, and partner organizations pay 1/3. Committee narrative in the 2024 Joint Chairman's Report required DSEI to create a plan to have employers pay a greater share of that stipend. And DSEI did not decide on one strategy, but has discussed several different strategies to increase wage subsidization that would have varied impacts on the composition of their partner organizations. With this, DLS is asking DSEI to update the committees on their progress in lowering that subsidy and what current cost-sharing arrangements are in the upcoming budget. Finally, I'll point you to the recommended actions on page 16, which include a BRFA provision lowering participation targets and 2 reductions related to those lower targets. And that concludes my prepared remarks, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cash, for your analysis. At this time, any subcommittee questions for our DLS analysts? All right, seeing none, welcome Secretary Dorsey and to your team. If you don't mind introducing the member of your team, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Severo. Thank you to the members. My name is Johnny Dorsey, for the record. I am acting secretary, unless you know something I don't know from last few hours, acting for now at the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. And here with me today is Deputy Secretary Sarah Flamang, who will join me today for this presentation. And we have a few other colleagues with us as well.
We're only being optimistic today, so, you know.
Okay, thank you. We'll take it.
Secretary Dorsey.
I do want to acknowledge our DLS analyst, Jacob Cash. Thank you for that. Also want to acknowledge our DBM analyst, Sandy Henderson. Thank you both. We also want to thank the administration for its budget submission, which took into account both the fiscal realities of this moment and the operational challenges of scaling a startup within the government. It took that into account by reducing our target, as Mr. Cash said, from 1,500 to 1,100 members, and therefore the associated request by a little over $13 million. We believe that that did strike the right balance as we move forward in this year. DLS recommends a further cut of approximately $13.8 million and keeping that target stable. That would cut the program's intended trajectory by about 50%, freezing that momentum and turning away candidates. We think that would be deeply unfortunate, and that the program is working as planned, demand is proven, and we're ready to continue scaling and serving more Marylanders. I want to give credit to those of you here who helped make this program a reality, and we don't hold it against people who were not yet in this body when the vote happened. They did not. And want to also give credit to my predecessor and the team that has built this before I joined 3 months and a few days ago. In just 2.5 years, we've grown from a concept to a program serving hundreds of Marylanders annually, from 275 to now 758, as Mr. Cash said. About 175% growth in that young adult pathway, and we have 710 alumni of the programs now. We have positive early results on all 3 of our core SERVE Act goals: addressing urgent community needs, equipping members with skills and career pathways, and then building connections across Maryland's diverse communities through shared service. The governor's allowance would replicate that 175% growth we saw from years 1 through 3 for years 3 through 5 and keep serving more Marylanders. A few other highlights from those first classes: we had a completion rate of 83.6 in the first year, 80.5 for the second cohort, compares very favorably with similar programs around the country. Over 550 members earned U.S. Department registered apprenticeship credentials. Over 85% of host partners reported graduates added organizational capacity and enhanced community impact. And 85% of graduates and partners were either likely or highly likely to recommend the program. You heard concerns raised about the absence of a completed evaluation. The SERVE Act sets an independent evaluation deadline of July 1st of 2028, deliberately allowing the program to mature. I am personally deeply committed to evaluation and evidence-based policy. I want this agency to hold itself to the highest standard. We welcome that accountability. In fact, we're actually ahead of schedule, already working with the University of Maryland Do Good Institute. And we respectfully disagree with the idea that we should change the scale trajectory because that has not yet been done. When the General Assembly passed and the governor signed this legislation with that target timeline, we think that was, in fact, appropriate. I helped with that language in the bill. I promise we are committed to that evaluation. I think that timeline was correct. I'm also proud that our programs continue to align more and more to the state's top needs. This year we launched a Maryland Youth Mental Health Corps, expanded the Maryland Climate Corps, and created an IT Accessibility Corps, working with the Department of Disabilities and the Department of Information Technology. That's helping ensure that all Marylanders can access our technology. Our members also represent all 24 Maryland jurisdictions and serve with over 200 host site partners, nonprofits, businesses, and governments. Looking ahead at Class 4, Part of how we hope to address the fact that it's true, we hit 90% of the goal. We want to hit 100% next year. Part of how we're trying to do that is scaling up with large strategic partners. And so we have a few cross-government working groups working towards that end, focused on education, health, and technology, 3 areas where you have major employers, major needs, and lots of future jobs for our graduates to continue serving through. It also will help with the cost-sharing objective that Mr. Cash talked about, to work with those large employers. We're proud to be at 33.8% of cost share already, but we do want to keep going. So for all these reasons, I am very optimistic about growing at the pace set in the governor's budget and excited to serve more Marylanders. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Secretary Fleming to talk through the specific points in the DLS analysis.
Thank you, Acting Secretary Dorsey. For the record, my name is Sarah Fleming, and I serve as the agency's Deputy Secretary. On page 13 to 14 of the analysis, DLS requested an update on progress in reducing the level of wage subsidization to maximize the use of funding for the program, and assumptions related to the share of wages assumed to be paid for by host sites in the fiscal 2027 budget. For Class 3, the 89.2% enrollment rate reflected real challenges, but not a lack of demand. As the DLS analysis itself notes, the number of applicants accepted into the program exceeded the participation targets by a ratio of more than 2 to 1. As this demonstrates, there was an overwhelming interest from young Marylanders to serve. The gap was in our capacity to match accepted applicants to host site partners quickly enough and in a way that led to confirmed enrollment. Specifically, the historic rate of grant terminations from federal agencies in the spring of 2025 negatively impacted the Maryland nonprofit sector, making cost sharing significantly more challenging. We have diagnosed this problem and are making significant strategic pivot for Class 4. We are investing in higher capacity partnerships with organizations that can absorb a larger number of members with strong supervision, clear community impact, and pathways to careers. We are also focused on sectors with ongoing hiring needs, opportunities for members to drive impact, and work aligned to core state priorities. As one example of this effort, we'll share that we have launched 3 cross-government working groups in education, health, and technology to develop new partnerships that will secure additional placements for Class 4. It's important to note that this effort will not displace our current partners who seek to continue, but constitute the bulk of additional growth. We are confident that this approach, more placements with higher capacity partners while retaining the strong community-based partners who have been essential to the program, will allow us to meet the participation targets in the governor's budget. The demand from young Marylanders is there. Our job is to build the infrastructure to match it. This is the department's top priority, and we are confident. For Class 3, DSCI implemented a tiered cost-sharing structure requiring host site partners to contribute between 20 and nearly 100% of member wages, depending on organizational size, with a blended average target of 33% employer cost share. As Acting Secretary Dorsey mentioned, our latest analysis of the percent we hit this year for Class 3 is 33.8%. For Class 4, DSCI is committed to continuing progress on employer cost sharing. Our strategic pivot toward higher capacity partners supports this goal as larger organizations such as school districts, hospital systems, and state agencies are better positioned to cover a greater share of member compensation. We want to be transparent. Reaching a 50% cost sharing budget is an incredibly hard target, and also one we remain focused on making progress towards as quickly as possible. Our independent evaluation partners at the University of Maryland Do Good Institute have looked into this question and benchmarked against several programs. They have yet to find one that has hit this precise target. We are committed to increasing host site partners' contributions over time. On pages 14 to 15 of the DLS analysis, there is discussion regarding the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism performance data and how GOSV will maintain elevated levels of grant funding. GOSV total funds granted to community-based organizations were $8.2 million in fiscal 2025 and are estimated at $7.4 million in fiscal 2026. The slight decline reflects the conclusion of American Rescue Plan Act funding and the transition to a new federal grant cycle. GOSV continues to focus on strategic investments that sustain elevated levels of AmeriCorps members and volunteers statewide. On federal funding, we want to acknowledge and appreciate the DLS analysis thorough account of the fiscal 2025 disruptions. DSCI faced the potential loss of approximately $6.9 million in federal fiscal 2024 AmeriCorps grants and $7.3 million in federal fiscal 2025 funding due to federal policy changes. Both funding streams were ultimately secured through a court order directing AmeriCorps to reinstate these grants in the former case and continued engagement in the latter. In federal fiscal year 2026, the federal grant-making cycle is months behind schedule, with a notice of funding opportunity released by the AmeriCorps agency in January rather than the prior September. This threatens AmeriCorps programs' ability to start their program on the anticipated timeline of mid-August, as well as the overall level of uncertainty. DSCI will continue to support Maryland's AmeriCorps programs and take efforts to maximize federal funding wherever possible. This experience underscores both the resilience of our team and the importance of state investment in Maryland Corps Service Year option as a foundation that does not depend solely on the federal funding environment. On page 16, the DLS analysis cites the lack of program evaluation as one basis for its recommendation to reduce funding. We want to provide important context on the evaluation timeline established by the General Assembly. The SERV Act, Chapter 99 of 2023, requires that DSCI procure the services of an independent evaluator by June 1st, 2027, with findings and recommendations due to the Governor and General Assembly by July 1st, 2028, and a public online dashboard of key performance indicators by October 1st, 2028. As we recall and understand the deliberations, the General Assembly, working closely with the administration, set this timeline with the understanding that a meaningful evaluation requires sufficient program maturity and data, specifically multiple completed cohorts with post-program outcome data, as well as enough time to work through the early pivoting that startups require, such as the pivot discussed in the host site partner section. DSCI is on track to meet these statutory deadlines. As Acting Secretary Dorsey mentioned, we have secured a partnership with the University of Maryland Do Good Institute to produce process and impact evaluations in advance of the SERV Act requirement. The agency has received a draft of the first process evaluation and expects a finalized report shortly. DSCI prioritized securing an independent evaluation partner well before the statutory requirement to ensure insights from the University of Maryland, in addition to ongoing internal DSCI strategic analysis of programmatic data, which drove programmatic design over the first few classes of members. In the interim, we share the committee's interest in leading indicators. As Secretary Dorsey mentioned earlier, early data from the first two completed classes regarding completion and workforce credential attainment is promising. We look forward to building on this foundation with the independent evaluation the statute requires. DSCI shares a passion and commitment to using evidence and data, and we will gladly discuss it with anyone interested.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And just for my record, that to your right is Sarah Fleming. Is that it?
Sarah Fleming, yes.
All right. Wonderful. Just wanted to clarify. All right. Any questions of the subcommittee? Delegate Beecham.
Yes. Could you expound on the youth mental health just a bit?
Sure.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. These are the members, in fact, I've spent the most time with so far in my 3 months. This is also a unique program because it is half members of the Maryland Corps Service Year option and half AmeriCorps members who are serving together under this one umbrella, working in schools with other young people who are struggling with mental health challenges. I believe the number, and I say that just because we're here in this formal setting, I believe the number is 40% of our high school students in the state of Maryland report either loneliness or more serious depression. And so this is a cohort of young people who themselves are very committed to helping in this cause. Many of them speak about their own challenges along the way. We're now helping students connect to whatever mental health resources they most need. In some cases, meaning clinical supports, in other cases meaning less intensive supports for the young people. As I said, 36 is where we started this year. I hope this goes to 100 next year as we continue to scale up this work on such an important issue that is aligned with other significant challenges in the state. Last thing I'll say is that this cohort also achieves those other two goals. So they're working on an important public problem. They're also already talking about how they can keep building careers in this space. For some of them, that means going to college, studying this, maybe advanced degrees. For others, it means going into the workforce right now and continuing to work on mental health. And third, this is a diverse cohort of young people who are all, through service, getting to know each other, bonding through doing this shared important work, and becoming better leaders for the future of this state.
Thank you, and I'm going to say Secretary Dorsey. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Beecham. Any other questions of the subcommittee for Secretary and his team? All right, seeing none, thank you, Secretary Dorsey, and to your team. That ends actually it doesn't end the budget hearing, but it does end our questions for Secretary Dorsey and his team. I have 4 individuals who are signed up to testify. I have a Tanea Moore, Robin McKinney, Kai Lehrman, and a Zachary Thomas. Again, Tanea Moore, Robin McKinney, Kai Lehrman, and Zachary Thomas. Whosoever is at a mic first can begin. And as a reminder, just 2 minutes for testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Robin McKinney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cash Campaigner of Maryland. Tanea works with me and is here, so I'm going to consolidate both of us. We are a statewide nonprofit that helps low-income people with their finances. We serve about 25,000 people across the state here in strong support of DSCI. We've been working with them sort of on 2 different tracks since the program started. One, the legislation passed has a requirement for financial education for members, and we have been the vendor providing the financial institution to members across the state. It is like our favorite program to work on. It is just such an impactful time to help people understand, one, making their finances work on the money that's coming in, but also setting them up for success in the future. So everything from, credit, budgeting, you name it, we're teaching the core members about, and we've really appreciated that partnership. The second has been starting last year, we were able to use core members at Department of Local Social Services to actually offer free tax preparation, which is our flagship program. So in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County, we've been able to offer this program. It's our 2nd year. Last year, I will say Prince George's County was the superstar, but across the 2 sites from last year, the Maryland core members did over 300 tax returns and brought back over 300,000 federal and state refunds into their communities, and it's just added incredible capacity to these partners. Across the state, we have less than sort of half of the capacity we need to make sure that everyone who's eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit is able to get it. So it has really helped us in these communities that had no tax preparation previously, and we've really appreciated their partnership and the way that they've worked with us. And so with that, we hope that you'll give them every dollar that they want. Thank you.
Right. Quite the testimony there, right? Thank you very much. Next, please.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Chair and Vice Chair, thank you for having me. My name is Kyle Lehrman. I'm proud to serve as the chair of the Maryland State Service Commission. And I'm here today just to support you guys giving them as much money as they asked for. But really, I'm here, we're at a time where the federal government is doing everything they can to directly attack the very idea of public service. And I think this is a time when Maryland can continue to be a leader in inspiring its young people and showing its young people the way when it comes to being public servants for life. I got my start as an organizer on the Obama campaign when I was 21 years old, completely changed my life, and I've dedicated my life to public service because of that young experience when I was 21. And I think that's what you see with all the young people who participate in these different programs, showing them that this opportunity is available to them and helping them understand that they can build careers in lives of service is so impactful. Obviously, that's on top of the incredible work, as you were hearing, that the core members are doing for folks across the state. Just to share a few examples, we've supported the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. It's an independent nonprofit organization advancing renters' rights and security. Members serve as outreach specialists for the Montgomery Renters Alliance. The Prathertown Community Development Corporation, which was founded in 1883 by enslaved persons Moses Marshall Rezin and John Prather and Anne Maccabee Prather. Founders and descendants still reside in Prathertown and have been promoting equity and entrepreneurship and education. and the Conflict Resolution Center of Montgomery County, which offers free mediation and conflict resolution services to anyone who lives, works, or attends school or volunteers in Montgomery County. And our members, again, serve as outreach specialists. So this is both, we get the double impact of showing young people that they can serve for the rest of their careers and making a huge impact in the communities across the country. So here to support their funding in every way I can. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much. You mentioned 2 organizations that do great work in my district, so glad to hear that those are organizations that you all support. Any questions of the subcommittee for this panel? Seeing none, thank you both for your testimony. I'll just call one more time before we move on. Zachary Thomas, is there a Zachary Thomas here? All right. Well, that ends the budget hearing for the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. We'll now move to Department of Public Safety and Corrections, specifically its Corrections Department. We will begin with our DLS analyst, Mr. Josh Weinstock, followed by Secretary Scruggs and her team. Mr. Weinstock, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Josh Weinstock, and today I'll be presenting the fiscal 2027 budget for DPSCS Corrections. The budget decreases by about $23 million, or 2%, to $1.1 billion. Starting with a few performance metrics on page 3, the average daily population, or ADP, of sentenced offenders in DPSCS custody has increased annually since the pandemic. However, growth rates have slowed. In fiscal 2024, it increased by about 4%. In fiscal 25, it increased by 2%, and it has grown just 1% in the first 2 quarters of fiscal 2026. The overall population has declined by nearly 20% since 10 years ago in fiscal 2016. Turning to Exhibit 2 on page 5, the exhibit shows the monthly ADP since calendar 2019, with the dotted line representing the population if pre-pandemic trends had continued, and the light shaded area representing the population if current trends continue. In April 2025, the incarcerated population exceeded the pre-pandemic population trends for the first time. As of December 2025, the population was more than 350 individuals higher than the pre-pandemic trend line. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the share of incarcerated individuals across age groups. The average age of individuals in custody was about 39 years old in fiscal 2025, which has stayed relatively constant over the past 5 years. The under 30 age population has seen the largest change in the past decade. It shrank from about 34% of the population in fiscal 2016 to only 26% of the population in fiscal 2025. Turning to Exhibit 4 on page 7, the average length of stay in fiscal 25 was 7.4 years, which was a 13% decline from 5 years ago. Most sentenced individuals in custody in fiscal 2025 were incarcerated for violent crimes as their most serious offense, which relates to Exhibit 5 on page 8, showing the incarcerated population by sentence length. The exhibit shows that roughly half of those in DPSCS custody are serving sentences 15 years or longer. Moving on to the budget, the allowance contains proposed deficiency appropriations that increase the fiscal 26 working appropriation by $57 million. The 2 largest deficiency appropriations are $28 million to cover shortfalls related to lower than expected vacancies and $17 million to cover fiscal 25 shortfalls in inmate medical health care costs. Of the $1.1 billion allowance, $659 million supports regular personnel, mainly for employing correctional officers. Exhibit 6 on page 10 shows the other portions of the budget. The inmate medical care contract is 1/4 of the spending. Exhibit 7 on page 11 breaks down the nearly $23 million proposed budget decrease. Major proposed decreases include $22 million in salary adjustments, $15 million in overtime expenses, and $6 million in supplies and materials for the Maryland Correctional Enterprises, or MCE. There are also $18 million in cost savings from the planned closure of the Maryland Correctional Institution at Jessup, or MCIJ, which will be partially offset by transfers to other facilities. The planned closure of MCIJ was discussed further in the DPSCS overview analysis. Moving on to personnel, the allowance contains 4,899 regular positions, which is a net decrease of 24 positions. Exhibit 8 on page 14 shows the net reduction for personnel broken out by facility. There is a reduction of 305 positions due to the planned closure of MCIJ and a corresponding 304 personnel increase at Jessup Correctional Institution, JCI. There are 3 issues discussed in this analysis. The first relates to the treatment of transgender individuals under the care of the state. Transgender individuals in the prison system are subject to high rates of violence and sexual abuse from both correctional officers and fellow inmates, and there have been numerous settlements over the years following instances of violence, sexual assault, harassment, and unwarranted use of solitary confinement. From calendar year 2022 to 2025, there were 6 settlements to transgender individuals, totaling just under $1 million. In fiscal 2025, the department reports 119 transgender individuals incarcerated in its facilities, or less than 1% of the total incarcerated population. Current DPSCS policy mandates that transgender individuals be housed based on their physical genitalia, and housing be informed by a risk assessment based on a number of factors. There are 2 types of restrictive housing: disciplinary and administrative housing. Disciplinary housing is when a person is removed from the general population after they have been found guilty at a hearing for violating departmental rules. Administrative segregation can be used for several reasons, such as for protection or for someone awaiting a disciplinary hearing. Transgender individuals make up less than 1% of the overall population, but make up 1.7% of the total time individuals spent in restrictive housing placements in fiscal 2025. In other words, transgender individuals were 2.7 times more likely to be in restrictive housing than the overall population. Exhibit 9 shows the estimated days the overall population spent in restrictive housing. From fiscal 2021 to 2025, the overall population saw a nearly 48% increase in the total number of days spent in disciplinary housing and a 21% decrease in the estimated days spent in administrative housing. Exhibit 10 shows the completion of housing transfers and compares transgender and cisgender housing transfers. Transgender housing transfers remained relatively constant in fiscal 2025 after increasing over the past several years, while cisgender housing transfers increased in nearly every category. In fiscal 2025, transgender housing transfers made up 1.2% of total housing moves. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, requires individuals at intake to be screened for risk of being sexually assaulted and their risk of committing sexual assault. The department tracks 916 vulnerable individuals across 17 facilities, with the goal of preventing those individuals from being housed with those who might pose a threat. PREA complaints are any allegation of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, or threat of violence towards a vulnerable individual. From January 2020 to June 2025, the department received nearly 600 PREA complaints, 29 of which have been substantiated, or just under 5%. Among those complaints, 63 of them involved transgender individuals, 3 of which were substantiated, also about 5%. Administrative complaints consist of grievances by incarcerated individuals regarding housing programs programs, commissary, and access to services, including medical care. The department did not break out administrative complaints by transgender and cisgender populations. Exhibit 11 on page 20 shows the breakdown of administrative complaints from fiscal 2022 to 2025. During that time, the department received 670 administrative complaints, of which 40 complaints were deemed to be meritorious or meritorious in part, representing nearly 6%. Complaints involving staff allegations, including assault, harassment, discrimination, or excessive force, accounted for over 300 of the total complaints during this period. Of those, 5 complaints, or less than 2%, were found to be meritorious or meritorious in part. Language in the fiscal 26 budget bill withheld $100,000 in general funds until the department submitted a report on the treatment of transgender individuals, which was submitted on October 2nd, 2025. DLS determined the report to be in compliance with the budget language and recommends the release of the general funds. The second issue in this analysis is an update on the reentry passport program beginning on page 21. The program aims to provide pre-release individuals with online access to their identifying documents, such as social security cards and birth certificates. This program has faced significant delays since the pilot program in fiscal 2023. Under DPSCS policy, case managers are responsible for offering individuals within 180 days of their release the opportunity to apply for documents such as birth certificates, social security cards, and other paperwork. DPSCS reported that in calendar year 2025, over 1,200 document accounts had been created in the program. However, creating an email account is required for gaining access to one's account, and incarcerated individuals do not have the ability to create email accounts while incarcerated. The department did not indicate how many individuals had gained access to their accounts. In fiscal 2025, around 3,600 individuals were released from DPSCS facilities. The department should comment on the number of individuals that have gained access to their documents through the reentry passport program by fiscal year. DLS also recommends adopting committee narrative requesting a report on the continued reentry passport program rollout. The last issue I would like to discuss is regarding the women's pre-release programming at MCIW, which is a high security facility. Chapter 16 of 2021 mandated that DPSCS build and begin operating a pre-release unit for women by November 2023. The Women's Pre-Release Center has faced delays and remains in the planning and design phase. This project is now expected to be completed in fiscal 2031. The fiscal 2027 proposed capital budget does not provide funding for the project. While the facility has been delayed, DPSCS is still required to provide pre-release programming to incarcerated women in its custody at MCIW. This programming is called Project Fresh and provides participants with access to educational and vocational training, trauma-informed therapy, parenting workshops, and substance use disorder treatment. Community partners play a significant role in offering additional programming. Project Fresh has historically struggled with low participation rates. In fiscal 2025, participation in the programming as a percent of the total women's pre-release population varied between 38% in February 2025 to 81% in June 2025. The Project Fresh does not receive dedicated funding for programming, and it has one program coordinator based in the unit and a volunteer coordinator who also provides services to the entire MCIW population. DPSCS should comment on its long-term plans for the Women's Pre-Release Program given the absence of funding for the New Life Skills and Reentry Center for Women in the fiscal 2027 capital budget. DLS also recommends adopting committee narrative requesting a report from DPSCS about Project Fresh and participation rates and programming. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weinstock, for very thorough analysis. Any questions from the subcommittee for Mr. Weinstock? All right, thank you very much. At this time, we'll turn it to Secretary Scruggs and her team You may begin, Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon, Chair Acevedo, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs. I'm the Secretary for the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Mr. Keith Dickens, the Acting Commissioner of the Division of Corrections, and Ms. Ellen Rappaport, Executive Director for Reentry Services. Again, the department appreciates the collaboration with Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Weinstock's thorough analysis. The department would also again like to thank our DBM analyst, Christina Hoyer-Tuyon, for her advice and guidance during this process. In the analysis, DLS asked us to respond to 2 issues and 2 recommended actions. You have our written testimony, so I will be brief. In regards to the reentry passport, nearly 3,000 uploads of vital documents have been completed by case management. Vital documents continue to be requested and uploaded into what's formerly known as Maryland Think Portal and now referred to as MD Benefits Portal. It's important to note that it is not mandatory for incarcerated individuals to apply, and DPSCS case management can only submit applications for processing for those that volunteer. Additionally, the functions of creating email accounts and linking existing accounts are not available while individuals are incarcerated. An email account is required for gaining access to the passport portal. With the support of our DPP agents and the availability of internet cafes that we have within our DPP offices, the supervised individuals have access to the passport portal. They can create an email and they can then link to their documents. And we just finished giving access to all of our DPP agents, and we're going through training right now so that they can make sure that their clients know what to do and have that access. In regards to our long-term plans for the women's pre-release, fulfilling reentry services before going home, or Project Fresh as we call it. That programming and the pre-release housing unit will remain in place as long as the plans continue to, as long as we plan to identify educational programming and services and opportunities to engage with our new community partners, just to support our women and our pre-release classification. Project Fresh has 12 ongoing programs geared to the unique needs of the current population within the unit, with 4 new programs being added this fiscal year. The majority of the program participation occurs on site with Project Fresh pre-release unit, while participation also allows staff to go into our general population areas and into the community partners onto our campus. Many community partners will provide 2 program sessions, one on site at Project Fresh and the other on the compound. Efforts remain on ensuring all women preparing for release, regardless of security level, fully benefit from the availability of programming at MCIW. Lastly, we hosted the Senate PSTE Subcommittee in December for a tour at MCIW. I highly encourage each of you to come out and see Project Fresh, talk to our incarcerated individuals, and understand the benefits that this program has provided for them. DLS has recommended DPSCS provide 2 reports on the continued reentry passport rollout and the Project Fresh participation, and we agree to both. And we are happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. Any questions of the subcommittee for Vice Chair Ivey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. The work that you do, really tough agency, but I appreciate your transparency in the work that you do. So you were speaking about the 3,000 individuals who were, correct me if I'm wrong, they were released last year, and they did have access to the passport.
Though not all 3,000 had access, because some of them did not have emails, but we now to date have at least 3,000 that are there that have access. What we're doing right now, we're working with DPP because we understand that that email is essential.
Sure.
So our DPP agents are being trained as to how to use that passport. So during intake, when when someone gets released and they come under supervision with DPP, they can now train that client how to get into that, to the passport. We have within several of our sites something that we call an internet cafe. It's actually a little area there where they can actually utilize the computer system for the internet. And they will be able to go into Reentry Passport right in our internet cafe, pull up their documents. If their documents are not in there, the agent is being trained how to download those documents for them. So that at that point, if they're in the community, if they're at a job interview, they can pull it right up on their phones. They don't need a copy of that documentation.
Okay, wonderful. DPP, could you, just for the record, give the acronym?
Division of Parole and Probation, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, you're fine. Again, thank you for the work there. I know that this is something that we've been working on together over the last few years, and it's just wonderful to see it in this position. Of course, we wish that last year could have gone perfectly, so on and so forth, but here we are nonetheless, and I just want to commend you again for your transparency and your partnership here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Ivey. Any other questions for the Secretary and her team? All right, seeing none. Oh, there you go. Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a question. From what I understand, that you've been meeting with advocates for the last couple of years on policies for incarcerated transgender individuals, but there hasn't been a policy published, as I understand it. Can you explain the progress?
So thank you for that question. I have, if I can, I have in the audience with me Assistant Secretary Garino. She has actually been taking charge of that. If I can ask her to come up to the podium and she can share with you some of the things that we've done with our advocates and our partners.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you for that question, Delegate. For the record, my name is Angelina Grino. I'm the Assistant Secretary of Data Policy and Grants here at DPSCS. And myself and my team have been meeting over the past few years to implement a wholesale review of the department's policies, not just those that specifically address the treatment or provision of medical services related to supportive care for transgender individuals, but really all of the policies across our system so that we can really better target the nature of a lot of those concerns where the process as designed doesn't necessarily take into account or consideration the different ways that our practices could have a disparate effect on transgender individuals. We've had revisions to our PREA policy, and I'm very happy that our I would say three of our major policies. One, our medical evaluations manual, which specifically includes a chapter specific to the provision of care for women, but specifically transgender individuals, which for our population is mostly transgender women, as well as a revision of our PREA intake screener. This is a gap I would say that we've seen and taking a look at other states, and of course from reviewing our internal data as well as speaking with advocates, that because transgender women especially face additional risks behind the wall, adding in additional criteria to appropriately weigh that as a risk factor when evaluating what an appropriate placement for someone is, decoupling that from maybe other factors that they were lumped into in our existing screener, as well as revising our identification and intake policies so that individuals have the ability to have the self-determination to identify proactively as transgender, absent going through our current process, which can get a little tied up in clinical review, so that they can have clearer pathways to those accommodations like search exception cards and some of those protective screeners and factors that can impact housing placement earlier on in the process. Those are all in legal review currently with our attorneys, assistant attorneys general, but as soon as they clear those, which I anticipate they will fairly quickly, they'll be ready for implementation shortly. Our next steps, I will say, involve continuing forward in our major policy that surrounds the housing and the, I would say, medical case management for this population. And what we're looking to do is similar to what's been successful in other states, which is decoupling that process so that the medical management occurs strictly under clinical supervision, and then additional security considerations and housing considerations, while they can take into account interdisciplinary input, can be strictly a security security decision so that access to one does not impact access to solutions with another.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like 80% through, I think you started getting to the answer to the question I was looking for. I think you were explaining part of the process, and then you, I think, started getting to the timing. So I guess my next question would be, you did say you expect it soon. I don't know what soon means in this world. And secondly, does it usually take this long to create policy? So what does soon mean?
Thank you for that question. I'm happy to drill down more. Soon meaning, I would say, within the next month at most. Those policies are just in the final stages of approval, and then they'll go to the secretary. As far as things taking a long time, certainly. Part of that is because we're trying to do this as part of a larger process where we're starting at the beginning so that when we're making later decisions, we have a more accurate understanding of how big this population is within within the DPSCS sentence population. This is really new territory for not just this department, but most departments across the United States. Other states that we have looked to, we have engaged in conversations with Massachusetts, with Colorado, states that really have done this well to make sure that we're taking the best of what they've done and making it really tailored to Maryland. And it's that attention towards implementation and specificity in finding the right solutions that has been really successful in other states. We have lost, I would say, a really big resource in the National PREA Resource Center, but we engaged in proactive discussions with them before that change was made on the federal level to make sure that we still have access to some of those resources that are made available to state corrections.
Right. Thank you, Delegate Kaiser. Any other questions of the subcommittee? All right. Madam Secretary, just wanted to follow up with you on the women's pre-release facility. This has been something that I know a number of advocates, myself, I'm in support of the building of this pre-release facility, but it's something that has been top of mind for a lot of us since 2019. It preceded your time at the agency. I want to, be frank and clear about that, right? This was before you. Under the previous Hogan administration, many of us pressured the then Secretary of DPSCS to act on this. Can you provide for us an update? I would appreciate some concrete information. My understanding is that there was a site visit to a proposed location for the women's pre-release facility. Not necessarily interested in updates in that regard. I would love to hear more concrete information on where we are, your department, in making sure that the women's pre-release facility is a reality sometime soon.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So first, let me say we have every intent to follow the law and do exactly what it says to make sure that we build that facility. We do have a site that we have determined. That site was determined based on everything that is outlined within the law. But as I'm sure you know, we have had now challenges to that site. And because of those challenges to that site, a decision was made to pause. DGS actually does the building. So they do not want to go forward with building something, and it is not where everyone is in agreement at this time. So we are we're at a stage of pause right now. And once there's some legislation I know that you're aware of that's out challenging that location. Once that can be resolved, I anticipate we will resume that process. But we are ready to move forward once that's resolved.
Okay. If I could also get that in writing, I'd appreciate it. And just coming back to your testimony, we don't have your written testimony. So if you can provide that, unless I'm wrong.
We did submit it, but we'll make sure you get that. And we also have a white paper that outlines where we are with women's pre-release. I'm happy to forward that to you as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's what I'm hearing from DLS. So if you could, we'd appreciate the benefit of your written testimony. As far as the women's pre-release facility, I had the opportunity to speak with the Secretary Chaudhry from DGS. Of course, they're waiting on direction from your department, right? DGS, they take direction from departments in order to do the planning and the building?
That's not necessarily correct, but we can have a conversation offline about that.
Okay. Well, that's my understanding, but my hope is that, we can move forward on this. I'd appreciate like something more concrete. The reason why we're at the stage where we're looking at legislation is because some folks feel like, we're dragging our feet on women's pre-release facility. There's been, whether it's no money allocated, whether it's we're planning, we found a site, we did the site visit, we don't like the site. All of these things are sort of kicking the can down the road in terms of providing, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women with the services that they need in order to transition back into society. And I know you all share that goal. Absolutely. My hope is that there would be a little bit more urgency by members of your team on making sure that this is a reality. I can tell you this, there are a lot, it's not just the advocates, there are my colleagues and I who are quite frankly frustrated in talking about women's pre-release facility for another year when this conversation started in 2019 and we're now in 2026. And that equity that we're talking about still does not exist for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. So that's a priority of mine as the incoming chair of PSA. I look forward to working with your team, but I would just let folks know that, the 7 years of, what we're hearing, whether it's from the department or from other folks are tired, we're impatient, and we would like to see something moving forward on the women's pre-release facility, and I'd appreciate your support and working with your team on that. The next question that I had, I just want to make sure is, all right. The next question I had at the last hearing that you were here, Secretary Scruggs had asked about programs for incarcerated folks and how much of those, who essentially are eligible for those programs. The reason why I asked that is because, as was mentioned by Delegate Kaiser, LGBTQIA plus incarcerated individuals are disproportionately placed in solitary confinement. And if that is the case from the data, then are they benefiting from the programs that you just mentioned at the last hearing that exist for inmates if they are constantly, whether it's in solitary confinement or they're in solitary confinement for a pretty extended period of time? Are LGBTQIA plus incarcerated individuals benefiting from the program if solitary confinement is being used this often, this frequently? Can you speak to that?
First, thank you for that question. And if I may respectfully, Delegate, we do not have solitary confinement in the state of Maryland. We have restrictive housing. And restrictive housing, we have two elements of restrictive housing.
But Madam Secretary, restrictive housing and solitary confinement, that's what we call solitary confinement here in the state of Maryland. It's restrictive housing, but it's essentially
I will share with you, it is not the same if you look at some of the ACA standards. So I'll finish. I respect your opinion. We have both administrative segregation and we have disciplinary segregation. And many of our transgender population are on administrative segregation. Some of it is voluntary for them. And I know Secretary Guarino can speak further on this. It's voluntary because they choose not to be in general population. But in administrative segregation, you are afforded every opportunity that is afforded in general population. You get that programming. They have the tablets that everyone else has for the programmings on the tablets. So no one is denied programming if they are eligible at that classification level for programming.
Okay. And we can disagree on like the semantics of things. Where I see it as solitary confinement, we're segregating people.
I understand.
And if they're not necessarily accessing the services that are available behind the walls and the kind of psychological impact that can have on inmates, then to me, that's solitary confinement. But again, like semantics. But I appreciate that response. Someone from my team will definitely follow up just for some more information on that so we have an idea. But I want to make sure that the programs you mentioned at the last hearing, that's something that's available to everyone, including those in solitary confinement. I will defer to Vice Chair Ivey for a question, and I'll come back.
Mr. Chairman. And again, this is my original question that I wanted to get to. I was taken off earlier. The $57 million as the proposed deficiency appropriation. And if you could just speak to us about how we got to this point And then secondly, I do want to ask if we could get prior years proposed efficiency appropriations as well. I mean, this is information we can get on our own, but we're trying to make sure that we're being a little bit more accurate on our end as we're going through and creating these budgets. So could you just speak to how we got to this point, 57 million? And I know
So I think some of the things that you have to be mindful of when you look at our deficiencies are the use of overtime. The use of overtime is quite high for several reasons. We've lost a number of pens over the years, so we do not have the availability of that staffing. We have a population now that has a greater medical and mental health acuity than I have seen in the 30-plus years I've been in this department. And because of that, many of them are going out to specialty clinics and hospitals weekly, daily, just because we don't have the services behind the walls for them. When you send a II out to a hospital in the community, you have to send 2 officers with them. And then if they get admitted to that hospital, that's 2 officers for 3 rotations because there are 3 shifts. And if it's overtime involved, that officer gets paid time and a half. So those numbers become very astronomical there. So most of our deficiencies are absorbed in our overtime because of the number, the amount of care that we have to provide for our incarcerated individuals. But we're trying to balance that in every way we can. I met with Centurion as early as today, this morning, so that the commissioner and I met with them to kind of put in place how do we get some of these hospital runs out of control? Are there any ways that some of these services can be rendered behind the walls? Is it space that you need? Is it equipment? Or can telehealth help do this? Or do they really need to go out? So we're looking at ways to kind of reduce that right now. But I just ask you to be mindful that the acuity of the people that we have right now, people come to us and they don't realize how ill they are. They don't realize the mental health conditions that they are experiencing. And we have become a sort of hospital. We're caring for them. And so our numbers go up in that area quite a bit.
Understand that. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, we just want to make sure that even if we do move forward with the $57 million proposed efficiency appropriation, like, is that going to be enough? Are we going to be back here next year having the same conversation? So we can work together offline about this, but I did want to mention it, and we will be looking back to see prior years, the deficiency appropriations that we've been moving forward with. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Ivey. Delegate Beecham.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Madam Secretary, the $265 million for the medical care, would the overtime be included in that number, or is that separate?
That's part of the contract. And my fiscal person is in the back too, I'm sure, Toya. Yes, that's just the contract.
Okay, so out of the $265 million, that's just for the medical care. That wouldn't be for the guards and
correctional officers.
I'm sorry.
We're not guards.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes.
That's okay.
The correctional officers.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
No, that is not for our overtime.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Beecham. Madam Secretary, real quick, you mentioned in your response just now about Centurion. It was brought to my attention about some anti-union campaign activity that's been conducted by Centurion, the private healthcare provider. Not sure if you're aware of it, bringing it to your attention. Just as a reminder, any, of course, companies that do contract with the state to provide services should be doing just that and not engaging in any other type of behavior or campaign other than what is spelled out in the contract. So just bringing that to your attention. I certainly plan on following up, but that was brought to my attention. I think it's important that you know that as well. The other thing, the other question that I have is what programs do you have currently, Madam Secretary, to help staff, correctional officers sort of deal with or cope with the incarceration environment? Are there Any programs that are offered to correctional staff?
Yeah, so we do have an employee assistance program that helps them do that. They also have Maryland Cares that will do that. And then within our department, we have our head nurse, Dr. Dempsey, that is in charge of our in charge of our staff. She actually started a wellness type program. It's been going on for maybe a little over a year now. We usually send out the wellness notes on Wednesday. It provides them updates on how to care for themselves, how if they have anxiety, who to reach out to, resources and things of that nature. So other than what the state provides, we do have the availability of those resources.
Gotcha. Is that information accessible, shared with staff?
It goes out user all, and within the correctional facilities read and roll call, it should be being read and roll call at least once a month or so.
Got it. Also, I know there is still some vacancies within DPSCS corrections. Do any of those vacancies include psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health staff?
Great question. Thank you. Yes, we continue to have challenges in those areas and competing with salary because of the private industry. I can tell you personally, I had a conversation with a psychologist that we were hoping to hire who told me that they could stay home and telework and make twice what we were going to offer them. But we continue to move forward. We've even partnered with University of Maryland to see if we can get any of them to work part-time with us. And some of them have engaged in that. So we are still advertising every day. It's on my LinkedIn pages, on everybody's LinkedIn page, but we do need clinicians that have that psychology or psychiatrist background. We do.
And are those who are separated or segregated, solitary confinement, are those folks that are separated or segregated from the rest of the population, do they have access to behavioral health specialists? How often?
So we have, the state has both a director of mental health services and a deputy that has a team, as well as Centurion oversees our mental health population. So they do have access. One of the things that I'm not sure if any of you are aware of is we have set up therapeutic communities within our division now. So we have mental health tiers where individuals may have low mental health, anything from anxiety, maybe behavioral problems, where they don't need to be in a severely mentally ill environment. And it operates just like a general population tier. The difference is that multidisciplinary team that needs to address them is there more frequently. They see them on a regular basis, and than they would if they were just in regular general population. So our teams are out there. They are meeting with them. There are med lines so that those individuals that need psychotropic medications, that they are getting their medications. And even upon release, we are connecting them to a community resource and we're giving them 30-day supply of psychotropic medications.
Gotcha. And so I really think in some respects a lot of the issues related to DOC, whether it's on hiring and retaining folks, stems from like the safety concern. You know, you mentioned the psychologist that you're trying to hire, twice amount working remote, but also there's a safety aspect of it, right? There's a safety aspect for incarcerated individuals, but there's also a safety aspect for staff. From last year when you were here to now, what has the department done to improve safety for correctional staff so we don't have, you know, what we've seen, whether it's staff being injured, and that I think not only contributes to the morale, but also folks wanting to leave, right? Like why would I be in security when I can go work, you know, somewhere else in security and it's a little bit more safer?
So I think respectfully, the first thing that you have to recognize is that we are not a safe environment. We are the housing of those individuals that are making our community safer. So that community that you had out in the street is now behind the walls. And they become more aggressive because not only are they no longer free to be out in the street, they are confined. So we see that their behavior levels, their aggressive behaviors do begin to increase. We do recognize and we do diagnose and see that they have behavioral issues or mental health issues that we treat. Mental health is seeing them. They are coming to clinic. They are handling that. Our correctional officers are being trained, and I'll let Commissioner Dickens tell you about it, but they are being trained in confrontational avoidance. They're being trained in de-escalation tactics. You want to talk about some of the things that you're doing?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. Currently, the DSO has reestablished de-escalation training. This is a 5-day training where staff is trained in preventing and de-escalation of eyes who are in crisis. Also, our crisis confrontation avoidance, where there are situations that the officers go through, learn how to avoid that. What is the best remedy for that? Also, what I'll say is during roll call, what we found is during our roll call trainings, not only is it a time that you give out assignments, but it's time when supervisors and staff are together. So training them on proper ways to frisk search to ensure that those officers and staff are safe. Just pressing upon about utilizing of our security equipment, such as our metal detectors, our cell sensors. And again, in our in-service training, this is being taught at the academy level as well as in our annual in-service. Thank you.
And what I'll also add, sir, is that we have really beefed up our intel. So our intel division is actually doing a lot more of listening to what's going on, whether it's through phone calls or just being in the facilities, and then being able to provide that information to the administrators of the facility so that staff can be told exactly how to manage part of that population that they see that may be problematic.
Got it. I know you mentioned earlier that someone on your team is new HR. Is it, or I might have been thinking of someone else. I thought I heard you say that there was someone new on your team around like HR. The reason why I'd mentioned that is because I'm curious as to what the department is doing to sort of curb the overtime and instead increase the hiring that's necessary, because there is a vacancy, right? And instead of us continuing to resort to overtime as a result, as opposed to just hiring, I mean, that's obviously having an impact on employees, on overtime pay, et cetera.
There is a vacancy, but we are at the lowest vacancy rate that we have been in years. I am proud to say that when I started this position, we were at 16%. And overall, we're at about 8.4% right now.
And that's for corrections?
So that's overall. So for corrections, we're at about 6.2%. And that's based on the number of positions that we had. That's based on the positions that we had. Be mindful, positions have been taken from us in the past. So based on the number of positions we have, we are filling. We have even given out bonuses for our far-reaching areas. It is very difficult hiring on the Maryland's Eastern Shore and up in the Cumberland area. DBM was gracious enough to allow us to do bonuses for anyone that is willing to work in those areas, but it still continues to be a challenge. I'll tell you some of the challenge also is in the Cumberland area, you can go right across the mountain. There's a federal prison. So once you get your 20 years with us, you can retire and you can start another career. On the Eastern Shore, there are Delaware facilities that are not far from us that we compete with as well. And then some people are just very comfortable in the way that they live in those communities, because we know those are very comforting communities on our far shores and our mountains, and they choose not to work within our correctional facilities.
And how do DOC correctional staff salaries compare to, and you mentioned Delaware and Pennsylvania and, federal, prisons, but you're also competing with local Department of Corrections, correct? How does the salary compare, I guess, to like some of those local Department
I will get you the update, but the last time I looked, that was over a year ago, our salary was actually higher than some. Gotcha. But the difference is their bonuses are much higher than many of ours. You have any on that?
I can't speak to the comparable hiring rates, but I will say in the past year, you really got to the heart of the matter, Chair Acevedo. We hired more individuals in the last year than we have over the past 7 years. So our hiring performance recently is incredibly strong, and it's led to a net gain in correctional officers in 2025. We're happy to give you the specifics of those numbers.
Gotcha. And that salary is that part of like a recently negotiated CBA, or is it separate? Just curious.
I'll have to get you that information. I'm not sure when the last time that salary was negotiated, but they're coming in at around 53 right now.
Starting salary.
Starting salary.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions of the subcommittee for Secretary Scruggs and her team? All right. Seeing none. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and to your team.
Thank you, sir.
We have quite a few individuals who have signed up to testify on DPSCS corrections budget. I'll begin with, I have a Tony Sines, a Vanita Doggett, Patrick Moran, and a Michelle Quadio. Apologize if I butchered that. I have a Michelle Quadio from A Mother's Cry. I have a Sam Williamson. Is there a Sam Williamson here? Oh, yes. Hi, Michelle. Perfect timing.
Can be, sure.
Wonderful. So whoever would like to begin first, please do. And just as a reminder, 2 minutes for witness testimony. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanita Doggett, and currently I'm a correctional case management specialist at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. I'm here today to testify as a proud member of ACME Local 1678, which represents correctional staff at Jessup Correctional Institutions all throughout Jessup. My goal and purpose as a correctional case management specialist is to develop an individualized programming plan for incarcerated individuals, including educational, vocational, and therapeutic needs, and ensure they succeed on their plans. Programming is essential to accomplish the rehabilitation goals for an individual. It is imperative that an individual actively participate in their programming to succeed when they leave our facilities. However, we face challenges that create barriers to our work. We're overworked due to our short staffing. Our caseloads are way too high. When our caseloads are too high, individuals are not receiving the attention they deserve. Because they are not getting what they need from our programming, they demonstrate greater behavioral and mental challenges, which impact others and individuals and staff. Too many of our members are leaving for other jobs because they are underpaid and we are understaffed. Today, we ask for your support with competitive wages for our workers so we can succeed with our work. We need to have wages that support our ability to live and incentivize retention in this career field. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Sines. I'm a correctional supply officer in Western Correctional Institution. I serve as the proud president of ASME Local 898, which represents Western Correctional Staff. Correctional staff at WCI and across the institutions face demanding conditions every single day. They show up to work. We are short-staffed. We are drafted for mandatory overtime. We are experiencing increased rates of assaults and violence. Correctional officers take their role of safety in supporting an individual's rehabilitation seriously. We want to see incarcerated individuals get the daily programming they need so that they are successful when they leave our facilities and rejoin their families and their communities. Incarcerated individuals need educational, recreational, religious, and vocational programming as part of their support. But this work is impeded when we are short-staffed. State law requires DPSCS, in partnership with our union, to conduct a staffing analysis every odd-numbered year to determine the amount of posts we need to safely operate our facilities. Creative Corrections, the firm hired by DPSCS to conduct a staffing analysis completed their work in fall of 2025. And their findings paint a dire picture for staff. Creative corrections found in 2024 across all of our facilities that correctional officer logged 3.4 million hours of overtime. This amount of overtime equates to the workload of 1,659 full-time correctional officers. Additionally, the vendor found variances between the authorized and required staffing level for institutions. As an example, the number of authorized positions for MBCI, correctional service officers, was 370 positions with 60 vacancies reported in 25. Yet, according to MBCI staffing plan, they were a requirement of 579 positions to fully staff current correctional services roster, but only 310 positions were filled. This is Maryland's Supermax facility. How can we make sure individuals in our care are getting the programs they need when we don't have the people to cover our post and make sure our facilities operate safely? We need your help to keep our system safe and make sure it works as it should. Please support staff by providing fair compensation for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Moran. I'm the very proud president of AFSCME Maryland. Council 3, our union is proud to represent thousands of correctional officers, case managers, and correctional staff across Maryland. Our correctional members are working in unsustainable conditions. They have an enormous responsibility keeping individuals in a correctional institution safe, while also ensuring individuals rehabilitate and reintegrate with society when they leave. This goal cannot be achieved without safe staffing and safe facilities, and right now our correctional system fails to meet those standards. Just last year in 2025, 13 incarcerated individuals were murdered in state correctional facilities. Well, that's a 40% increase from 2024. While 3 folks were killed in January 2026 alone. At the same time, assaults have skyrocketed between incarcerated individuals and against staff. Our officers are significantly understaffed. They are pushed to the brink on overtime consistently. This is happening at the same time our correctional population is trending upward from pre-pandemic lows. The system is unsustainable. Correctional staff will continue to burn out, and the goal of rehabilitating individuals back into society will not succeed without changes to our system. We're asking this committee to reject any cuts in positions for frontline correctional staff and invest in our state employees. This session, our union is fighting for a 2% COLA and a step increase for our state employees. For county detention employees, Washington County, where we have 3 facilities, state facilities, offers a starting salary of $55,000, annual step increases, and competitive pension benefits. We have 3 state correctional institutions competing directly with that package, and we need more competitive compensation to attract and retain state employees in our facilities. Finally, I want to share with you the union busting tactics of Centurion, who is the contracted private health care provider in the state of Maryland in all the state correctional facilities. Centurion runs all the health care. Our members there attempted to organize, specifically in WCI and MBCI, and Centurion sent text messages, emails, held one-on-one meetings with union avoidance educator, and held large group meetings where they attempted to convince workers they should not unionize. These employer meetings occurred during employees' work shifts. So that means on state time, in state facilities, using state resources. So then, therefore, you were not providing the health care you were contracted to provide to the incarcerated individuals. They came into the state facilities to run these in the state institutions, places where some of our officer members can't even enter, right? As a union representative, if I had to represent someone, I could not enter those parts of the facilities. But their CEO and their union avoidance counselors were permitted to enter the state facilities during work hours and run their show. That, in the private sector, that'd be known as fraud. So they were committing fraud because they were not providing the services to the inmates in the state of Maryland as they were contracted to do. And what was the response from the department and the administration? Oh, we didn't know. We didn't know that was happening. I've spoken to the governor on this, about this. Our union has spoken to the administration, the department about this, and it's been the consistent answer of, oh, we didn't know. So you didn't know that a private contractor that you're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to was committing fraud on a daily basis, and you're going to do nothing about it. I don't understand how this company still has a contract with the state of Maryland when they've committed fraud. Usually when people commit fraud, they end up in jail. They haven't in this case, so maybe we need to re-examine that. Lastly, I would just say that we're asking this committee to ensure nothing like this ever happens again, that fraud isn't committed using state facilities and state resources and state time, taking away health care from incarcerated individuals. And lastly, I will say, in lieu of all that, our members still voted to have a union in WCI and NBCI. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Next, please.
Well, I finally get to meet Patrick Moran after 3 years. Thank you. Chairman, Vice Chair, you're welcome. I'm Michelle Kennedy Quadio with A Mother's Cry. Chairman, I got to meet your Chief of Staff this morning, gave her a briefing, including letters that we sent to the governor both in August 2025 of a roadmap moving forward, and also in December, supporting the union in their request. We support this. Their requests for added pay and benefits. Their step increases were frozen in the last several years. They have worked, my son is at ECI, he's been there 9 years. The president of A Mother's Cry son has been there 19 years. So we know firsthand, not only at ECI, but the other prison facilities. We've actually, had mothers and loved ones reach out to us on behalf of their folks that are incarcerated. I would like to take a moment to thank the Secretary and the Commissioners for meeting with A Mother's Cry this past year. And Secretary Scruggs, I hope that we continue to work together to find a solution and a way forward. I'm going to support the union 100%. 2,500 staff short. If you have allotted pins of 500 a year and you divert 100 of those toward administration, and then in 25 the attrition rate was greater than the hiring rate, you're still at the sum zero game of being understaffed. And this is why when we have educators come into ECI, there's no vacancy, volunteer activity coordinator, so you've got an already overworked correctional officer trying to get visitors to come in. This is untenable. When we wrote to the governor, we talked about the conditions in the New York State prisons where 5 prisons struck, and they did it for the very same reasons that we're telling you about today. So now we've given testimony to the legislature and to the governor. Fortunately, I guess the new commissioner and the secretary are here to listen to us. We have to speak truth. The second thing I would say is on the facilities. Capital improvement program. Forget about the fact that, we protest the Baltimore Therapeutic Treatment Center. There is nothing in the budget to talk about cleaning the ducts, to talk about rental of air conditioning equipment for, say, the extreme heat months in the common areas. There's nothing about replacement for pipes. There's nothing about replacement for electrical apparatus. There's nothing about duct cleaning or vermin eradication. So on those 2 areas, A Mother's Cry is firm that going forward, we have models. We're working with expert consultants on how to move forward with a new model. But right now, I have to support the union, and we also have to ask you to put something in the budget that's going to address these conditions in the facilities. And for that, we thank you. We want your support in working with DPSCS to find solutions.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to this panel. Any questions of the subcommittee for this panel? Vice Chair Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your testimony here. Not so much a question for the panel, but some very serious allegations that were made earlier, and I do want us to look further into them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other questions from the subcommittee? I will just echo Vice Chair Ivy's comments. I mentioned it earlier, but any company that contracts with the state should to provide a service, in this case, healthcare service to incarcerated individuals, should not be engaging in anti-union campaign activities, particularly on state time. I think it goes without saying. We'll definitely follow up with you all for some more information on that, because I'm curious whether Centurion provided advance notice that they were going to do something like this prior to it being done. But there needs to be accountability so that it's made clear that anti-union activity is not taking place on state time, and especially from a company that is receiving state dollars. So thank you all so very much. We don't have anyone else sign up to testify. Actually, we saved the best for last. All right, I have a Sam Williamson from the Public Justice Center. I have a Heather Warnkin from the University of Baltimore School of Law Center for Criminal Justice Reform, and a Michael Tynes, also from the University of Baltimore School of Law Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Whosoever is at a mic first may begin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee, for having us. My name is Sam Williamson. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a lawyer with the Public Justice Center and a co-leader of the Trans Rights Advocacy Coalition, also known as TRAC. Since 2023, the legislature has approved budget language that requires the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services to issue a report on the treatment of incarcerated trans individuals in their custody. I am deeply grateful to this committee's support for continued oversight and accountability. According to the Vera Institute, over half of incarcerated trans people experience sexual assault while incarcerated, and nearly 90% have been placed in solitary confinement. To call these placements voluntary misses the mark. It is a false choice when you tell someone they can either be housed in a place where they are left at risk with people who have threatened to abuse them or who have abused them in the past, or to tell them they can go into solitary confinement. Placing people in restrictive custody also costs the state more money. It costs 3 times as much to house somebody in restrictive housing. Thanks to the oversight provided by this committee, TRAC began meeting with the department in April 2024 to provide feedback on their policies that most directly affect trans individuals. We're grateful for the department's interest in improving its policies, although as you have heard, progress has been slow. We finished providing feedback on the medical evaluations manual in summer of 2024. As you've heard, it still has not been published. As Ms. Guarino has noted, we've also provided feedback on a few additional policies. There are roughly 25 other policies that the department has identified that particularly touch on trans individuals, which we have not yet provided feedback on. We appreciate that the department wants to get it right. Trans people have been here since longer than we have had this carceral system. We look forward to continuing to seek improvements for our community, and we ask that this committee repeat last year's budget language. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Acevero and members of the committee. My name is Michael Tynes, legal fellow for the University of Baltimore School of Law, Center for Criminal Justice Reform. I, along with TRAC, am here to address the department's October 2025 report and the urgent need for continued budgetary oversight regarding the treatment of incarcerated trans and gender nonconforming individuals. We are grateful for the efforts the department has made since our testimony on these issues in 2024. There is progress and good faith. However, as described in detail in our joint response to the report and written testimony shared with this committee, the evidence in the department's own records indicates that current management of trans individuals continues to be an untenable moral failure and fiscal burden. By late 2025, Maryland had paid over $840,000 in settlements related to the mistreatment of incarcerated trans individuals. Our analysis highlights ongoing concerns and rights violations in the following areas: housing policies resulting in persistent unsafe practices and conditions, heavy reliance on restrictive housing, solitary confinement, including as a means of protection, continued deficiencies in the investigative and complaint process, missing data, including critical information regarding PREA violations, Decades of research have shown that solitary confinement constitutes long-lasting psychological harm, including anxiety, paranoia, depression, PTSD, and psychosis. Incarcerated individuals who have spent time in solitary confinement face a much higher risk of suicide and self-injury. We've achieved this transparency today because this body demanded it through the budget process. Therefore, TRAC urges this body to repeat the budget narrative process again this year. Thank you for your time and your dedication to ensuring equality under the law for all Marylanders.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Heather Warnken. I serve as Executive Director at the Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Prior to my current role, I was at the U.S. Department of Justice and did a lot of work on related initiatives on protecting the rights of incarcerated individuals, and in particular in the enforcement of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. We've been grateful to work in partnership with TRAC, and I won't repeat what my colleagues have already said about the progress of those efforts. I will repeat the gratitude to the department for the good faith partnership, but I think it's been very clear today the harm that continues to happen when that is slow and not implemented. I also want to emphasize something really critical in this moment, which is the importance of state action and leadership given the federal climate and erosions to protections of trans incarcerated individuals from the federal government and how that impacts people incarcerated in state facilities. There's a number of examples to this. I will highlight one, which is that the U.S. Department of Justice has already issued a directive to PREA auditors that protecting the rights of trans incarcerated individuals violates the president's executive order. It's among the long list of direct and really harrowing attacks on this community, and those who are behind the walls are particularly vulnerable. So some of the same exact protections that TRAC and our center were able to utilize to create this partnership with the state based on their lack of compliance with these federal protections are eroding, making it more important than ever that we step up as a state. I also want to emphasize the fact that this isn't just about protecting this vulnerable population. You heard those harrowing statistics about the increased risk of sexual violence and other harm endured by trans people behind the walls, and that makes everyone less safe. And it negatively impacts the environment for the correctional workforce and incarcerated individuals alike. In our written testimony, we detailed our ongoing concerns with the PREA process, and I'm happy to share more data in follow-up questions or further inquiry about where that stands. And again, we thank you for your partnership and ongoing oversight.
All right. Any questions of the subcommittee for this panel? Seeing none, I have a quick question for Ms. Warnken. Can you just expand? You mentioned the concerns around the process. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yes. So even though, again, we've come a long way since the first report out from the department on this budget language a couple of years ago, and we have seen this incremental progress, one of the really standout areas that not only speaks to some of the ongoing practices, but also culture surrounding the treatment of trans individuals is the PREA process. So between 2022 and 2025, trans incarcerated people filed 63 PREA-specific complaints, yet only 3 were substantiated and 0 were substantiated in 2025. Now, across the country, these low substantiation rates indicate systemic failure and bias against the people who are trying to report their victimization. And we describe in our written testimony more about the difference between unfounded, unsubstantiated, and substantiated, but we feel like this is really a red flag to the ability of trans people who are being harmed to have recourse.
And I'm just curious as to what role does the Office of the Correctional Ombudsman, or Ombudswoman, I guess, in this case, play in like all of this? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about that. And in my prior testimony before this committee in the DPSCS overview, addressed on the importance of their role and highlighted the fact that because they are so new and so under-resourced, the OCO doesn't have anywhere near the capacity needed to respond to the volume of complaints they are getting from all institutions and all incarcerated individuals, much less to do some of this systemic oversight. And so for trans individuals who are facing many different barriers and increased risk when they even try to report harm, getting that complaint to the correctional ombudsman and then having action on that independent oversight, we've got a long way to go across the state to get that capacity where it needs to be.
Gotcha. All right. Seeing no further questions from the subcommittee, thank you to this panel. And seeing no other individuals sign up to testify on this budget, that concludes the hearing on DPSCS corrections as well as this subcommittee's budget hearing. Thank you.